Good morning, everybody. My name is Henrique Passini. We at UNCTAD are happy to host this seminar, this research seminar on tackling manufacturing pollution in the Global South. This seminar will be made of 4 sessions over 2 mornings here in Central European time. The participants are encouraged to stay throughout the sessions to cross-fertilize with their knowledge each of the sessions. The first session today is on circular economy in the South. Those sessions will be recorded and made available online after the event. This seminar is part of the Sustainable Manufacturing and Environmental Pollution Program, which receives support from the UK-FCDO. It is also an official side event of the 2022 World Circular Economy Forum, which is going to take place later this year in the second semester in Rwanda. The background papers linked to this event will be reworked based on the seminar discussions, and the discussions today and tomorrow will also serve as inputs to procurement calls under the SMEP program, which will fund a total of 10 million USD worth of projects starting in the second semester this year. Without further ado, we will start session 1 running from 9 a.m. to 10:45 a.m. We are slightly late, but we'll make it work. The participants, and I see that many already joined, they can use the questions and answers tab down below in Zoom in order to pose questions to the panelists to stimulate the discussions. We look forward to having this session as a really technical and practitioner-based brainstorming session in order to help us advance and target support to the projects that are most in need. Just check if the first moderator has already joined. Just a quick logistical point. Cecilia, please send the speaker link to Anna Balance. She joined as an attendee. Thank you. The moderator for session 1 is slightly delayed. I think we are having some small IT issues. No big problem. I will introduce him once he joins. This is Professor Desta Mebratu, who is, by the way, the champion on leading UN work on wastes, and also Professor Stellenbosch University in South Africa. I will, without further ado, introduce the panelists for session 1, starting with Mrs. Anna Balance, who is a climate change and environment advisor at FCDO, so the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office in Dhaka, Bangladesh. So it's a real practitioner's eyes here on of international development assistance in the field. We also have a preeminent academic in the areas of circular economy. Happy to have Professor Konstantinos Tsagarakis from the Technical University of Crete. He works at the Economics and Environmental Science and Technology Department. We also have from Pakistan, Mrs. Saima Murtaza, who is now working for the World Bank, but she's an environmental consultant, has served in various senior positions in Pakistan and abroad. And she has worked for UNDP in Pakistan previously on the development of climate change adaptation and mitigation programs related to sustainable energy, water management, and conservation of ecosystems. So we have a very eclectic skills panel here. And finally, we have Mrs. Susanne Karcher, who is a founding member of the African Circular Economy Network. She's a chemical engineer by formation, and she started her company EnviroSense, an environmental consultancy in Cape Town, working on integrated resource and waste management programs towards pollution prevention. So we have many voices of practitioners and many voices of academia. So hopefully we have a very stimulating discussion today. Without further ado, I will give the word to the first speaker, Mrs. Anna Balance, based in Dhaka in Pakistan. Anna, the word is yours.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. Hello, and thank you very much for inviting me to the panel session. I think you introduced me as a practitioner. I have to say I come from this more as a we have been working in Dhaka on some pilot work on pollution and waste, mainly waste management, and yeah, I'm happy to share a few experiences on the ground, but also looking forward very much to hearing from the experts who have more understanding of the solutions. So apologies if this comes across as a lot of description of the problem. This is our experience here in Dhaka. So to start off with waste, solid waste, municipal solid waste. The current waste recovery system in Bangladesh is, there's a significant level of informal dumping. There are very few proper sanitary landfills. This creates a huge public health hazard. It also contributes significantly to greenhouse gas emissions. The government has just recognised this in the nationally determined contribution, where it's included solid waste management as a sector for the first time. In terms of recycling, it's largely informal. Hard materials, plastics, building rubble, glass, those tend to be picked out from the waste and recycled informally. The official report is of approximately 31% of plastic is recycled. There are strong regulations in place. Plastic bags were banned back in 2002. But largely, this is not followed. There is still a huge problem here. And that's largely because of limited resources in the government to collect, to separate, and to dispose or to recycle appropriately. There's also lack of willingness to pay by the public for waste collection and disposal services. And indeed, the problem is growing. So since 2005, it's estimated that the amount of plastics per person has increased threefold to 9 kilograms per person per year. So the FCDO recently launched a study to look at this, to identify what can be done, how can we improve, in particular, the market for recycling, for recycling plastics. And they looked in particular at problem plastics, which include tags, blister packs, food trays, bags, films, wrappers, the things that are highly toxic, very difficult to make from recycled plastics. They often contain chemicals which then impede the biodegradation of other plastics if they end up in a combined waste stream. The recommendations from this were that public-private partnerships could drive investment in waste collection and treatment, that there's a need for more extended producer responsibility to make manufacturers take greater responsibility for their products, to integrate the informal waste pickers into the formal waste system, to create markets for recycled waste, which includes improving the quality of recycled plastic, and to look at tax incentives for investors in recycling technologies. But overarching, the conclusion was that in order to reduce plastic, for a plastic ban to be successful, there need to be cost-effective substitutes. And shopping bags is an example. The government of Bangladesh introduced jute as a substitute for plastic bags, and that has been successful. But in other for smaller consumables, that hasn't. There isn't a readily available, cost-effective substitute. We've also done a short study on medical waste. So this has long been recognised as a particular problem in Dhaka, across Bangladesh, but particularly in Dhaka. The COVID situation generated additional waste because of large volumes of PPE in particular that we used, but also because of the highly infectious nature of that medical waste. It was then highlighted to the authorities as really needing to be addressed. There was actually an article in The Lancet about the situation in Bangladesh. So the British High Commission in Dhaka asked a company called Waste Concern to look at the issue. And again, they identified that there is a medical waste management rule from 2008, but there's little awareness of it. There's a lack of separation of medical waste in the healthcare facilities. So sharps, radioactive, infectious, other wastes are not colour-coded and separated properly. There's no special handling or transport. So often people collecting the waste from medical facilities don't have the proper equipment. And it ends up in the general waste stream and is not taken to specific sites. So what this project did was to do a baseline survey. It introduced standard operating procedures across all health facilities in Dhaka. It established training courses for the health workers to understand, for people working in health facilities to understand how to separate and categorize medical waste, provided protective equipment for waste collectors. And we also provided specialist medical waste vans and a medical waste incinerator, which is the first one in Dhaka city. And it's going to be opened in the next couple of weeks. It does have the facility to be run from renewable energy, but the current rule does not allow that. The current law doesn't allow that, but at least there will be an international standard medical waste incinerator starting soon. So we're really keen for that pilot to be expanded. There's a huge buy-in from the government of Bangladesh, and we're hoping that other donors might be able to replicate that across the country. And then just lastly, quickly on pollution, particularly industrial pollution, that's obviously a huge concern. Again, there are environmental standards, but they are not followed properly. There is growing awareness from, for example, markets in Europe for the ready-made garment sector, which is a big industry. It's the largest export industry in Bangladesh. So there's some kind of market, some consumer pressure, but it's simply not enough. There's a lack of enforcement. The big powerful companies get away without following all the rules, and of course it is the poor communities that end up being affected by this the most. So we are looking to address that. We don't have a project at the moment, but we have approval to start a program to look at air, water, soil pollution. So yeah, very much looking forward to hearing from the experts and gathering some ideas for that. And of course, happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Anna. It was a very good expose on a concrete situation on the ground in the case of Bangladesh. I also remind the participants that they can use the Q&A tab to pose questions. We are happy to have now the moderator of the session online, Let me just briefly introduce him and he will carry on introducing the other participants. The moderator is Professor Desta Mebratu, who is an Ethiopian professor at Stellenbosch University in South Africa. A chemical engineer by background, he has a PhD in industrial environmental economics from Lund University in Sweden and an MBA in international business from the American University of London. He has over 31 years of experience working on industries, universities, and international organizations. He worked also for UNEP for more than 13 years. Professor Mebratu, it's an honor to have you and all your experience. The word is yours to carry on with the panel. Thank you. I believe you're muted, Professor.
Thank you, Enrique. My connection is, yes, thank you very much, Enrique. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
You can't hear me?
We can. It's working now.
Okay. Yes, apologies. The connection is not good. I'm trying to connect both with iPhone and my laptop. So if I break out in between, I apologize, and I would like to request you to take over. And I'm very happy to be part of this session, which is of critical importance for most developing countries, including African countries. And I hope we'll have a very fruitful discussion in the course of the session. I think Anna has started the session. I was able to follow part of her input. Our next speaker is Mr. Konstantinos Tsagarakis. Is a professor of economics of environmental science and technology at the Technical University of Crete in Greece. So without much ado, I would like to request Konstantinos to continue with his contribution. Over to you, Konstantinos.
Thank you, Professor Mebratu, for the introduction. Thank you also, Enrique and Annalise, for this invitation. I'm glad to be here and discuss my experience on circular economy with you. I have also shared a short presentation. Should we upload now, or you want me to share my screen? What is?
You can share your screen. You can share.
Okay. Okay, you can see it now, I suppose.
Yes.
Stunning.
Good. So actually, my experience.
Yeah, you may go ahead, please.
Okay, my experience of circular economy is based on some macroeconomic analysis we have done in Europe, and also some analysis from data from big data that we get from Google searches or from online networking platforms. So today I will share with you an experience we have with my colleagues, Mr. Tsironis and Dr. Daglis. I saw them already. They have joined us attendees. So if there is any specific question, we should be able to answer to you. And what we are working on is to analyze data from LinkedIn, where companies and people, but in this work we will present what companies do. So the companies are joining the LinkedIn platform to get more connections, to get connected with other companies and clients, and there they share some information. They share information about what they are doing and what they are interested in and what services they can give to customers, or what are open for cooperation. And what we did is we have already collected data from companies all over the world, and there is also a work almost finalized and ready to be published. We hope it will be accepted. It's a work under revision for all the companies in the European Union. And, but what we have done in this short presentation is to show you some data about what is the situation in the study region. So in the next slide, you can see we have, because we didn't have much time, I mean, and we didn't have a lot you asked for a 4 slides presentation. We tried to merge all the information in very few slides, but I think they are very informative. So what you can see in this slide is all the countries of the sub-Saharan region, what are the industries they are dealing with. So when someone registers a company, they have to select only one industry. So here we can see what is this industry, and the total number of companies is 178. So you can see that there is a prevalence in major categories like environmental services, renewables and environment. You can see the number of the companies in each of these categories. So there are 44 companies in environmental services, 32 dealing with renewables, non-profit organization management 11, management consulting 9, civil and the social organization 7, farming 7. Now we are going to more specific industrial sectors, information technology and services, plastics. I would say just 6 companies in plastics, research 6 companies, international trade and development 4, logistics and supply chain 4, consumer goods 3, philanthropy 3, think tanks 3, construction 2, etc. And you can see there are the companies, these companies in these countries cover quite a good number of industries. And this shows actually what the entrepreneurial sector drives on circular economy. From other works that we have published, and I will communicate with you later on in the chat, we see that the companies are driving and are moving forward circular economy. And there is a very good slide I have added at the end of the 4th slide, but it's important to also to share with you this one. Another important information we get from these companies is where they are located. So you can see that here in the right panel of this slide, you can see where are the headquarters of these companies. So we see that the majority of them are in Nigeria, with 51 located there or stating their headquarters there. Kenya 38, Ghana 24, Zambia 9, Uganda 8. I skipped those outside the study region. Tanzania 4, Senegal 4, Rwanda 3, Ethiopia 3, and that's all the companies. Other countries have offices in the study region, but the headquarters are elsewhere. So we see that Switzerland are 6 companies, United Kingdom 5, United States 3, South Africa 2, Netherlands 2, and there are other countries with 1. And 6 of these companies did not specify the headquarters. And here is a good opportunity to say that what we find in the platform is what the companies state. And also we find companies that when we meet, companies is a way to register, but when they say companies could be something different than an entity that we have in mind that could be a company. Could be, for example, let's say a conference. Some people may choose to register as a company. Nevertheless, I believe that looking collectively, we can get some very important information. And I will go to the next slide, where is the other region that is covered in this seminar, which is the South Asian region, where we found 33 registered companies. Here I want to mention that we may see less companies, but this may be because to the penetration of the LinkedIn in these regions. Although when we are talking about circular economy, where innovation is one of the main characteristics and the main drivers of circular economy, companies tend to go online, and also another very important issue, tend to have their profiles in English, so that they tend to communicate with companies outside the countries, outside the local language. And with this, I want to share with you that our data collected so far from Europe and other countries shows that in countries where the main language is not English, also companies, more than 90% of the companies, almost 100% of the companies tend to have their profiles in English. There's only one exception, Sweden, just for the record, where a great number of companies are in Swedish, but this is the only country we found this. It's one third of the countries in Swedish, but this doesn't apply to this region we are studying. So we go to the South Asian region, and we see that also the same pattern is followed, but with less number of companies. So renewables and environment is 5 companies, environmental services is 5, non-profit organization management is 4, international trade and development 3, plastics 2, textiles 2, automotive 2, arts and crafts 1, business supplies equipment 1, apparel and fashion 1, etc. So we have 32 companies registered in this region, and we see on the right panel of this slide where these companies come from, the headquarters of these companies, 13 in Pakistan, 10 in Bangladesh. We couldn't identify 2 of them, and then we have Switzerland, Canada, etc. So headquarters of the company, 23 come from the study region, and the rest are either not identifiable or come outside the study region. Another important information, among the other information the companies enter in their profiles, we can see the specialties, what they deal with, what are the let's say, some keywords that can help find what are the interests of the companies. So we collected also this information, and we have tried to present in a comprehensible way, but I know it seems very complicated, but it's listed by frequency. So although circular economy was the keyword to select all this company, this means that circular economy could be anywhere in the description, could be the title of the company, could be in the description of the company, but also in the specialties. We're talking also for the sub-Saharan African region now. This is only for the African countries we are looking for. Again, circular economy is the majority, 78, sustainability is 23. Also to mention that although there could be only one industry registered per company, in the specialties, they can enter as many specialties as they wish. So that's why the total number is much higher. So the circular economy is 78, sustainability 23, specialties, recycling 18, waste management 14, renewable energy 11, plastic recycling 10, environment 9, sustainable development 8, innovation 7, etc. What this field can help us is to see what each company is dealing inside one country. So if someone wants to study what the circular economy sector is really practicing in one country, they can take the data for all the companies in this country, and by studying the field specialties, they can see what they are dealing for. So this is a very good way to see what each country is, let's say, more or less specialized in doing, which I suppose it would be in line with other databases where the companies register and they put also official data. So here you can see the frequency of specialties, but there are more, 677 of them, which we could not fit and present in a slide, but if you want to share with you, we'll be happy to do so. So this is for the African region of the study countries, and the same presentation for the South Asian countries. We can see again the same pattern, but with less specialties, as the companies are much less. Circular economy are dealing 15 of them, recycling 8 of them, sustainability 7, waste management 4, climate change 2, composting 2, engineering, environment, fashion, manufacturing, etc. Just to let you know that these are not fully treated, all this data, because if someone is interested, we can, because it's a very large number, then the locals' opinion and the locals' further filtering of this information could be very important to map what are the important specialties in the companies in each country. So again, here we'll be happy to share with you more specialties, as 130 more were downloaded with our approach. And also I exceed the 4 slides, but I think it's important to see. There is one paper just published in Journal of Clinical Production, and we are now also in the period that is free if someone wants to download. So I will share the free link later on. We did a panel data analysis, and we found for the European countries, and we found that based on the circularity rate index, which the Eurostat collects for the last 10 or so years, we could correlate with other macroeconomic indicators, and we found that circularity rate, which means what is the rate of the resources that is re-entered in the manufacturing process. Just to give you an invitation, it may range from, let's say, 2-3% for the low-performing countries to almost 30% for Netherlands, which is a positive outlier. More companies are about 5 to 10, 12%. And obviously, if it's 100%, this indicator would mean that all the resources are fully reused in the production process. So the technological innovation is an index, is an indicator that shows countries with high technological innovation perform better in the circularity rate. Countries with high socioeconomic development, this is a composite index which incorporates several socioeconomic indicators, have a positive correlation with circularity. The economic growth, the more developed the country, the more probable will be to have a high circularity rate. And also the entrepreneurship, the number of let's say simple, the number of companies, or how easy it is to create a company, also is positive correlative with circularity rate. And there is a negative effect related to the polluting entrepreneurship, which is an indicator related to the CO2 emissions. And also, this is a very nice graph we derived from the data in Europe, where you all know that we are talking about hours. We started with 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, some speak about 10 hours, 14 hours. Companies showed us what we need to do, because from all the specialties in Europe, as I mentioned, it's more than 3,000 companies we studied. We see that the hours could be much more. Here I just mentioned revive, rebrand, reclaim, reconnect, recover, recultivate, recycle, redeploy, redesign, redevelop, redistribute, reduce, refashion, refill, reforestate, refurbish, refuse, regenerate, regreen, reinvent, remanufacture, remarket, renew, repack, repair, replace, reprocess, repropose, resell, restore, restructure, rethink, reuse, revalue, and reverse. So you can see what information we can get from all these companies who are really driving the circular economy. And I think that a better study of those companies in the study region will give us more insights on what these companies are dealing with. And also, following some recent recording of these companies, I want to mention that the number of companies that are joining LinkedIn and are putting data there is increasing very, very fast, and especially in countries that we are studying right now. So this is more or less the knowledge I would like to share with you. This is the knowledge I have for the study region, as I have not directly worked there, but I think this information can give you some good insights and we're happy to further explore if some of you are interested in that.
Thank you very much, Konstantinos. Those were valuable insights. I'm surprised with your breakdown of specialty focus on circular economy number, which showed that circular economy is recorded higher compared to the other sustainability, recycling, and so on, which is something that needs to be looked into in more detail. And I think it is an indication of something, maybe from the so-called socio-cultural context perspective. But we'll come back to that part of the discussion. And now I would like to introduce Mrs. Salma Murtaza. She is an environmental consultant, served as senior positions in Pakistan and abroad. She has previously worked for UNDP in Pakistan in the development of climate change adaptation and mitigation programs related to sustainable energy, water management, and conservation of ecosystems. So with that brief introduction, I give the floor to Salma. You have about 10 minutes, Salma. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. This is me, Saima Murtaza. And yes, the introduction which was given is very much about me. But just to add 2-3 more things about myself, I've been working with the population sector. I've been working with the health sector as well. And yes, I'm a writer as well. So the reason why I work for the population and health sector was to get the insight about that how environmental indicators are affecting the socio-economic indicators and how the population indicators are affecting the health indicators, and all are like, they're linked to each other's. Linking about my experience, I've been working with UNDP and my project was related to indicators which are affecting the global challenges, the climate change and the biodiversity, especially waste and population related. So we've been working with the air, checking the indicators which are affecting the air pollution, the water, the waste, and what are the challenges we are facing in Pakistan. So I designed the indicators, and the major core areas were that we have to come with innovation, the green technologies in Pakistan, which somehow, somewhere we are working with. But to more introduce it, we need institutes strengthening, we need the governance strengthening, we need the law enforcement. And above all, for all these issues, we require a lot of mediums which needs to create awareness and capacity building. So in regard to solid waste management, we did introduce the eco park system, in which we introduced the concept in Pakistan, bringing up all the industries under one platform, so which can create the pollution under one platform, under one umbrella, and which can be sorted out. Like we in Pakistan, with the help of the chambers and with the help of the ministries, we introduced the concept of creating an umbrella of all the industries under one platform, so that there should be air pollution, water pollution under one area, and that should be treated simultaneously, or that should be treated among all of the others, creating a pooling system and creating a different strategies and bringing up new innovations. Like solid waste management system was being treated there, wastewater treatment were being introduced there. So less pollution and less of the crowd and the community was being affected. As we're focusing on the health, as we're focusing on the environment, as we're focusing towards the other issues as well. So this is one of the concepts which is very innovatively being introduced in Pakistan. And we have a lot of parks, industrial park systems, which have been introduced in Sindh, in Punjab, in KPK. So we see less pollution in regards to this. And this still needs more capacity building. It requires more innovation by the government. It requires more law enforcement. Yes, the laws are working there as well. In regard to plastic pollution, I had the privilege to work with a UK-based company to introduce oxo-biodegradable plastic packaging in Pakistan. And it was a very hard cookie to break, because it's a very strong market, because plastic industry is existing from a very long time. And it takes 400 to 1,000 years for a normal plastic to degrade. So every plastic existing in the environment is there from the day it was being born. So just imagine the amount of plastic pollution we are facing. The landfill areas are totally polluted. We have less landfill areas because of the pollution and the population. So we focus on bringing up the law I worked with the ministries to focus on the oxo-biodegradable law. And luckily, we were able to bring up the law in Punjab and different provinces where oxo-biodegradable packaging, plastic bags were being banned, cotton bags, other recycled bags were being introduced. And we worked with the help of WWF, other industries and other agencies. And yes, this not only banned the plastic packaging, but this introduced a lot of new technologies in Pakistan, which increase a lot of public-private partnership, which increase a lot of new innovation, sustainability, and a lot of job opportunities for other peoples as well, business opportunities as well. So this has been there, but yes, there are a lot of challenges and a lot of issues which we face as well. And the major important challenges we face is the convincing the consumer the importance of the usage of biodegradable plastic or the banning of plastic packaging. The lack of technologies are missing here. The adoption, how to adapt it, the capacity building, the training, and above all, the mindset, how to make people convinced towards it is also missing. The areas where we face that, other than that, what we did as part of working with the government, with the Ministry of Environment, we try to convince the government to initiate laws enforcement, to bring up the penalties for people who are not doing. So the way the previous presentation was being presented, we figured out the registered industries and the non-registered industries. Letters have been floated to them in regard to wastewater treatment plants, in regard to ban for normal plastic packaging and the penalties and the law enforcement. If they do not implement it, what will be the penalty? And yes, been working with the government on different strategies, how to convert the biomass into fertilizers, how to introduce anaerobic system in the country, how to convert the medical waste. So these sort of initiatives have been introduced. The focus was basically on bioeconomic as well as blue economic, focusing on the transportation, focusing on the energy sector, and yes, how simultaneously it's affecting the marine life, how it's affecting the coastal life, and in the end, it's affecting the environmental and socioeconomic indicators. These were the areas I've been working very aggressively as well. We have been working with the health department as well, how that these environmental issues are affecting the health of a normal individual, the diseases which have been caused, the issues with the landfill areas, the open landfill areas. There's no proper disposable system so far. Yes, we have few, but they are overly loaded. The people who pick them up, they catch up skin diseases, they catch up respiratory diseases, they catch blood infection as well. So what is the treatment? What is the requirement? The trainings required, the capacity building, though it has been done to a level, but still there's still some gaps there to be done. These are some areas where I've been working very aggressively as well. Other than that, I've been working with the government in order to seek green sustainable buildings as well, which is very important. While working on a lot of projects with the government, how to initiate green procurement, which is very important, how to reuse, recycle, recover, and the word rote, which is missing. Rote is a word, how did we introduce in housing the food waste to convert into a biomass? So this ROT system we have been introducing in a lot of housing societies, that instead of throwing the organic waste, you can convert it into a compost and it can be reused as well. So this is the areas where we've been working. The enforcement level is missing. Yes, the strengthening of the institutes is also missing. Law enforcement and penalties are very important in regard to this. So this was a brief areas where I've been working. Other than that, I have been working on the population sector, how the increase in the growth rate in Pakistan is affecting the other indicators, is affecting the resources, the environment resources, the other socioeconomic indicators of Pakistan. So we have been working closely. As you know, that all the SDGs are very closely linked to each other. The environment indicators is linked to the population indicator is linked to the urban increase. All are simultaneously linked to each other. So I have been working very closely with it. Yes, in Pakistan, the concept of reuse, recycling has been introduced like in every industry is like it's playing a very important role, and green investment, green procurement has been playing a very vital role but still the missing factor is institution strengthening as well as the governance government needs to have a very strong law enforcement. So this is some of the areas I've been working. I've been writing a lot of articles to create awareness, and awareness is one of the factors which needs to play a very important role, and sharing the right information, because we need to seek the green products, and the change in the production process is something which the consumer does not accept. So how to convince them, how to make them that this is not only beneficial for their trading, for their business, but this is also beneficial for the environment you are living in. So that's a few brief which I gave about it. So
thank you very much, Salma, for sharing your experience on what is happening and what has been happening in Pakistan. And I think you have raised a number of useful points to consider, including the promotion of eco parks as a platform for addressing pollution problems and also facilitating resource exchange and so on. With that, I would like to invite Ms. Susanne Karcher from South Africa. She is a founding member of the African Circular Economy Network, a chemical engineer by background, has an environmental consultancy company called EnviroScience CC in Cape Town. She started it in 1999. She's working on integrated resource and waste management programs, ultimately geared towards pollution prevention. With that brief introduction, I give the floor to Susanne. Susanne, please.
Thank you so much, and thanks so much for having me. I came quite late into this meeting, so I have not done a lot of preparation, but I did read through the papers, and I will try to stick as close as I can to the subject of what the context of manufacturing in the global south and what it means. Before I start, I just want to quickly give you an introduction to ACEN, the African Circular Economy Network, how we came about. It was in 2016. I actually was in Geneva at the World Resources Forum conference, and the whole world was talking about the circular economy and, you know, how it's going to be the panacea that's going to solve all our problems. And it became very evident to me that we didn't have this debate in Africa, and that if we would have this debate in Africa, that there would be probably other parameters that would be more pertinent than what Europe was talking about, because you know, the fact is that in Europe, there is most of the production still taking place. In Africa, you see very little OEM, original type of equipment production happening. We have different challenges. So coming back to South Africa, I spoke to colleagues, and you know, we are all on the same wavelengths, and saying we need to create a unique voice for Africa to be part of the global circular economy debate. And that's when we decided to start the African Circular Economy Network. And, you know, but it also shows already in our vision that, because our vision statement is to build a restorative African economy that generates well-being and prosperity, inclusive of all its people, through new forms of economic production and consumption, which maintain and regenerate its environmental resources. So as you can already see, there is quite a much stronger emphasis on the social justice element, on the element of saying, well, there's no point for Africa to embrace the circular economy unless it really has also social positive implications, because we have different system pressures. And I was actually giving a presentation to the EU about, and it was concerned with overcoming challenges and new pathways to equitable North-South trading relationships, particularly linked to e-waste value chains. And part of this, I was really pointing out that we have very specific trends in South Africa. As I said, very little original manufacturing, mostly at all assembly. We are net exporters of resources, of primary resources, and that is a problem that needs to be taken into account. Our demographics are different than in Europe. We see massive population growth in foreseeable futures, and our population is young, and the majority is in a working age. At the same time, we also have a different understanding of employment. We're not having the traditional 8 to 5. It's an exception. Africans are by nature entrepreneurial. They are opportunity in the present seeking innovators. And I think future strategies for manufacturing and manufacturing in the South need to take cognizance of that as well. That many are economic survivors on a daily basis, which also brings about a different level of innovation and local self-reliance. We have obviously seen massive inequity of wealth in many countries. And, you know, I keep on also saying there's no point in measuring African countries' well-being in GDP, because GDP doesn't tell you anything in a country where you have such inequities of wealth. You would rather want to find out, you know, what is the Gini index? You know, how abundant is the majority? How much of the money is trickling down to the people of the ground? So the African CE agenda must be shaped by the African realities and must include human development and building resilience and creating unique and supplementary position playing into the strong points of Africa. And that brought me also to the understanding, or sharing my understanding, that we're losing on both ends. I mean, if you look, for example, with Europe at the moment and the green energy revolution, the Green Deal, Europe is now in need of a lot of additional resources for their own energy transition. Those resources are very often critical raw materials. Where are they taken? They are taken coming out from Africa in primary manufacturing and primary resource extraction. So we export those resources, but there's no manufacturing. The manufacturing is happening in China, and then the windmills and hydrogen plants and whatever, you know, helps Europe for the energy transition is then actually imported to Europe coming from China. So the manufacturing is out of our hands. Then the funny and other thing happens, specifically when it comes to electronic waste, because at some stage, all of those equipments are broken or obsolete. It comes back to Africa. So we are then engaging in the recovery of the valuables, which is basic manual dismantling mostly, or mechanical processing. But again, the value fractions we cannot actually process in our own continent. The manufacturing of the value fraction happens again in Europe. So I think it needs to be pointed out that we really are at the losing end of manufacturing. And I think it has also shown this trend in South Africa. We have just yesterday heard that we have now a record unemployment rate of 35.5%. And our manufacturing contribution to the GDP has never been lower. So there is really a huge crisis in terms of how are we going to move into a next generation of green tech manufacturing. And the existing activities that are there, I want to quickly highlight that I'm aware of that go into the right directions, as for example, from the CSIR, they have actually looked at a report that was done for Africa called the 5 Big Bets of the Circular Economy, and also try to find out which are the potential transition areas in South Africa. And one of the work groups that has been formed is now specifically around manufacturing, how to go about CE transaction in the manufacturing sector. And similar to my colleague in Pakistan, we also have heavily put our bets onto eco-industrial parks. And promoting the concept of eco-industrial parks in South Africa, reviving existing industrial areas that are just not functioning. And we have funding from United Nations, UNIDO, to push for eco-industrial park developments via our department, that's the DTIC, Department for Trade and Industry and Competition. We have the National Cleaner Production Center in South Africa. Again, they are also very much active in terms of cleaner production. I'm a trainer there myself. So the idea is really to go to manufacturing companies of various sectors and improve their efficiency, water, waste, and energy. The problem for me is if you are actually improving the wrong type of industry, is this such a good idea, or is it actually a barrier to real breakthrough? That's just a question that I'm leaving there. We have also now received some funds from the Netherlands, from RWO, to establish the potential for a circular economy platform in South Africa, similar to what's happened in Lagos, Nigeria. And the idea is really to bring key stakeholders together on a platform, create an interaction between the private and the public sector for an open debate, facilitate connections through that platform. So this CAPSA is currently investigated regarding its feasibility. And finally, the other thing that people should know what's going on in Africa, which is very exciting, is that ASEAN is collaborating with an organization in Ghana called Footprints. And together with Footprints, we are very active and unearthing case studies in Africa around the circular economy. The aim is to have 500 case studies just made in Africa of unique approaches to the circular economy, which are actually quite differing from, for example, what you see in Europe. There is a lot of emphasis, for example, on the Internet of Things, sharing equipment, for example, tractors and things like that via electronic platforms. That's really an exciting kind of new avenue that we see, making very unique products out of waste. Who would have thought that you can actually make leather out of fish waste? Well, they do it in Kenya, and out of pineapple waste, they make a pineapple leather as well. And those are really unique products made in Africa, which I'm personally quite excited about. So that's pretty much what happens on the African continent, on the South African countryside. And ASEAN obviously is a knowledge partner. We are represented in 30 countries in Africa as a knowledge partner. We have over 100 representatives in those 30 countries. And the one thing that I personally feel as a co-founder of ASEAN is that we must push much harder for promoting the right kind of manufacturing. Because as I pointed out, if we're pushing in the wrong type of direction, we're pushing linear manufacturing. We're trying to make linear manufacturing technologies less bad. And I don't think that will help us. I think what a potential that has not been unearthed for Africa is really looking into secondary resource manufacturing, where we really become the hub of using secondary materials and utilizing secondary materials for secondary manufacturing. And that comes specifically to mind when I think around electronics, because it obviously makes more sense to recover functionality of waste electronics than just to recover the materials. And I would like to see Africa playing a future role and becoming a hub for remanufacturing, for repair, and building entire industries that can build on utilizing secondary materials. And just a thought, perhaps one of the key strategies would also be that while we are now again exporting a lot of the raw materials to Europe for their own energy transition in Europe, why are we not actually becoming a little bit more innovative and we including certain agreements on saying, well, we would like to connect key manufacturing, pre-manufacturing steps. So before we hand over the resources to Europe, why can we not secure basic pre-manufacturing happening on African soil? I spoke to someone from the Club of Rome, and that person was even more radical and said, well, why is Africa not considering in future to not sell resources, but to actually lease them to Europe? That way, the resources will stay, as ownership in Africa, and Africa will not forfeit its own opportunity for its own energy transition and circular economy revolution. So those are just some thoughts. But manufacturing is so much better and repair than just recycling. We do know, for example, according to Walter Style, that rations of man-hours per kilogram of resources, if you remanufacture an engine versus virgin resource, the ratio of labor is 270 to 1. So we need to actually look at those realities. Our resources are people, and we need to skill the people, and we need to position ourselves uniquely in the global manufacturing chain. I would like to see technicians that bring back equipment to life, and that is happening on African soil. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Susanne. Those were you have raised a number of critical points, starting from the socio-economic dimension of the challenge we have in the African context and the importance of shifting from extractive economy to the productive economy, which is a major challenge that we need to address in the African context. And I appreciate the effort you have made through the African Circular Economy Network which perhaps is related to what Konstantinos has shown us earlier in terms of having circular economy on top of sustainability. And by the way, in 2019, the African Ministerial Conference on Environment during the regular session, the African Circular Economy Alliance was launched in 2019. And this is now being hosted within the African Development Bank. So hopefully with the bank and the European Union support, the shift towards circular economy will be more effective in the African context compared to what we had in the past. Before opening the session for discussion, before closing, I just want to make a couple of points based on the presentation that have been made so far. The first point I want to make is when we think about circular economy, we have to realize that it is a conceptual progression that started from the 1980s. Basically, late 1980s, we started with waste minimization, pollution prevention. And then in the early 90s came cleaner production. And then later on, towards the end of 1990s, beginning 2000, came resource efficiency. This was followed with an industrial ecology concept, eco-industrial parks, and then green economy, circular economy. So circular economy is not something which has dropped from the sky. It is just a progression of all those interventions that have been developed, not only by academic institutions and research organizations, but by the industries, by the private sectors themselves. So the private sector is a key player in this process of conceptual progression that brought us where we are. So recognizing that is very important. And even the presentation that has been made by a number of you was referring to most of these interventions that came earlier as part of the circular economy progression. The second point which we need to recognize is that the circular economy has socio-cultural context. What is the way it has been implemented in Europe may not work in Asia, may not work in Africa. And Africa may have a different foundation for a circular economy. As you know, circularity or reuse and recycle is part of the survival structure in the African economies. Just to give you an example, recently we conducted a study on waste, particularly on phasing out open burning of waste in Africa. And the study showed that 70 to 80% of waste that is being dumped or disposed has a potential of being reused and recycled. Out of this, only 11% has been recycled so far. And most of this is happening within the informal sector. And earlier, Susanne talked about Africans being entrepreneurial. The innovation and the creativity we see within the informal sector is a critical part of this transition to the circular economy. So the UNEP has shown in 2018 that if we are able to reuse and recycle the waste, the useful part of the waste that is being generated in Africa, we could be able to create an $8 billion per annum industry just on using waste as a secondary resource, creating thousands of jobs. This is the kind of circularity we have to consider. And I think the last important point which we need to keep in mind is that it's not only enough about to work or tinker within the existing industry structure. We have to think in terms of how can we create a new foundation, infrastructural foundation for circular economy. And in this regard, I think African countries and some Asian countries have a unique leapfrogging opportunity because since they are at the early stage of development, they could be able to lay down the foundation by building new infrastructure that are more friendly for circularity. One aspect which has been mentioned is the eco-industrial parks promotion. But again, here, we have to make sure that the eco-industrial parks are not developed as an isolated island, but they have to be both vertically and horizontally integrated within the local and the national economy. So these are the kind of issues we have to bring forward when we talk about circular economy or promoting circular economy in the South. There is a lot of potential, and there are some challenges that need to be overcome, but it is possible to make Africa and some Asian countries at the forefront of promoting circular economy at the global level. Having said that, I haven't seen any question in the chat box. I didn't see any Q&A. Perhaps I would like to ask Enrique or the host on the other side if there are any specific questions that were forwarded to the panelists. While they are working on that, I would like to ask each of the panelists before closing to make specific suggestions on what are the key areas of focus that countries in the South need to put more attention in terms of benefiting from the transition to circular economy. This will be your closing remark focus, just about one and a half minutes before closing the session. But Enrique, are there any questions on the other side?
Thank you, Desta. Yes, there is one question from our side. I was listening to many of the presentations. Mrs. Balance and Mrs. Murtaza raised points on the importance of strengthening public institutions responsible for enforcement and pollution control. But if we can flip the coin and ask about the private sector. So in the private sector perspective, taking into account the specific demographic challenges mentioned by Mrs. Karcher, how to create the private sector demand for circular practices. So what drives entrepreneurs, as Karcher mentioned, to actively seek to recapture materials, to conserve energy, and to mitigate pollution in those contexts of Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia? So because you always need to connect the regulatory authority and the enforcement authority with incentives so that the private sector actually moves on their own to see some advantage in doing so. And this is a question for the panel. Feel free for anybody to raise the hand and reply. I would like to see if you have some examples that could help us guide our thoughts on this, on the private sector dynamics and then demand for those solutions. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that is a very important point. So the key element here is how to incentivize the engagement of the private sector in the promotion of circular economy in its variation. Are there any concrete examples that we can learn from? So we can start with Anna and continue with the same order. And I would like to request you to make also your closing remark in terms of the specific focus area where countries has to put their effort in terms of enhancing circularity and circular economy promotion in their respective countries. Anna, please.
Just a brief remark. Anna had to leave for another meeting, so it will be Susanne Karcher has raised her hand.
Okay. Susanne.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Look, I mean, there's always the carrot and there's always the stick, right? And as much as we like the carrots, if it comes to making sure that the private sector in Africa is interested, very often what you have to do is just create a level playing field and actually ask the private sector representatives to have the same obligations than they have elsewhere in the world. And I'm playing into the field of EPR, extended producer responsibility. I can share with you that there is a thought paper coming out with the WE Forum soon on e-waste Global Day about the idea of a global EPR system. We've seen now a global treaty for plastics. And I think a lot of the issues can really be resolved on producer level if they are taken to account and have the same responsibilities than they have elsewhere in the world and cannot go through any legal loops anymore and do things, and externalize costs where else they can't externalize them anymore. So please, let's create a global level playing field. And I think that will create a lot of circular economy based positive spin. Thanks.
Salma, do you have any reaction to the questions? Yes, Konstantinos, please go ahead.
As I said, I don't have much experience on the region, but what the question that you raised should be better addressed to the people that work for these companies, to the entrepreneurs, and ask the managers what they expect for dealing with circular economy. And I think this is the most important thing if you want to get direct information and analyze it and see what they would like, what would be the incentives, what would be the support, what should be the policies from the decision makers that they would make them work further and explore circularity. And as I said, there is online also, there are online resources. I presented a number of companies that are registered in Africa. Just to let you know that the whole, because I see that there is also some interest for the whole Africa as a continent, there are about 340 companies that are registered online in LinkedIn platform, and there is a way to communicate with them and ask them what are the incentives for them. But also I would suggest that since other countries are now following and recording down the circularity indexes, the circular rate index, and there are already 2 papers that I have worked with, and I already shared the one with you in the chat. But there is data that could give insights also for Africa. I agree with Desta that it's a different continent, and people think differently, and maybe the socioeconomic conditions are different. But there are things and indicators that can drive policies, and I mentioned some of them. For example, innovation, and increase the business easiness, how to make a business easier. There are also some other socioeconomic variables, like, for example, people with children are more keen on having circularity activities or support circularity activities. So a good, like we do in research, a good review on what happens in other regions or in other countries will give some insight to the study region, along with some direct research to the companies that already have registered. And also to mention another issue about the data you can get from online platforms is that you can see, after a very good cleaning of the data, how many people work for these companies. This is some data that we didn't have the time and the experience, because we don't have much experience in Africa, to get out. But if you are really interested, we could share with you some data and see how many people now work for these companies.
Thank you very much, Konstantinos. There are some useful links provided in the chat box in relation to examples, Amanda, Susanne, and so on. And I encourage all participants to take a look at those those links. I think essentially, I mean, when we talk about incentives, it is also about removing some of the disincentives, because there are built-in disincentives within our economic system that does not encourage circularity and promote circular economy. So, including some distortionary subsidies that exist in different countries. So when we talk about incentives, it's also about addressing the disincentive side also, which is creating some barrier on the transition to circular economy. Of course, as indicated earlier by Susanne, the producers have the largest responsibility in influencing this process, but national governments, private sector players are also critical contributors for the transition to circular economy. By the way, the African Union is planning to have its industrialization summit in November 2022, and during which most of these barriers and challenge for structural transformation in the economic diversification will be addressed, and this sustainability dimension is one of the key elements that is going to be addressed in that summit context. So I think, at least from the African perspective, the necessary ingredients are being put in place. It's a matter of consolidating them and taking them to the ground level, engaging all the relevant partners, private sector, informal sector players, where there is a lot of creativity, and bring it forward so that it can create the required benefits for African countries. If there are any other comments or questions, we can take a couple of minutes before closing. Enrique, on your side?
I suggest we give the panelists a chance to give their final messages, and then ask if Saima has any comments on what was being discussed. Thank you.
All right. In that case, I will invite the panelists who are still with us to make your final concluding remarks before ending the session. We start with Konstantinos. Any final remark?
My remark was more or less my response to the previous question. So I would say that we need to take advantage of all the available data. At least from my side, this is what I can advise. All the published data, we can study indicators. As Saima mentioned, she's studying indicators. I think it's good to study indicators and see how they relate with variables related to circular economy. And also the direct involvement of those that are dealing with circular economy can give us very good insights. This is more or less what I wanted to say, and I will be happy to further cooperate with any of you for the study region or for the whole Africa or Asia if you are interested.
Thank you very much, Konstantinos. Susanne?
Yeah, the final thoughts. There is the Dutch model of the CE value hill. I'm sure you have heard about it. And, you know, it shows the different business models and which are a high level business model versus another. And my concern that I'm seeing more and more is that the African circular economy debate is firmly hinged on the lowest level of circular innovation, which is material recovery, okay? So we keep on spending time, and even beach cleanups are done in the name of circular economy because we recover some material. But the true challenge is product innovation. And I think if we talk about promoting manufacturing in the South, we need to also talk about product innovation. When are we going to see actual product innovation? Because that is for me really telltale sign if manufacturing in the circular economy space is becoming more successful. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Salma, are you still there? I think Salma has left.
Yes, hi.
Yeah, okay, Salma, please.
So with my closing remarks, I would like to say that there should be, I focus on public-private partnership a lot. And secondly, the strengthening of the government and the strengthening of institution is very, very important. So there should be a platform where we should, it's not only the concern of environment, it's the concern of other departments, the health department, economic department, you consider all the agriculture department. So we should not only focus on the environmental side, but we should focus on other side as well, focusing on the SDGs. So there should be a platform that should be created where all the departments need to sit and where they need to strategize the innovations, the green procurements, the green projects, the green technologies, which is going to be beneficial not only for the one department, but in short, it's going to be benefit for the country level. The government strengthening the law enforcement, the rules and penalties, the policies needs to be revised and they needs to be checked. And there should be a very smart business model which needs to be initiated. It goes simultaneously. A business model cannot work without policies, and policies cannot work with a good, smart business models. So I think these two needs a very strong attention. And secondly, as we all are under one platform, one umbrella, we need to create a seminar, a session, a global sort of seminar session where we should be focusing all these 4 areas, which is like solid waste management, plastic pollution. We should focus on the water and air, and keep a seminar where should we invite the green, the new innovative, the technology initiatives under one umbrella, and they should share their views and they should share the advantages of it. where all the top industries, the registered industry should be part of it. I think it's going to be a big change if we initiate something like this, and we should introduce new technologies under that umbrella. And either it can be a seminar form or it can be a webinar. Webinar does not create that impact, otherwise physically being present. So the strengthening of the institution, yes, the capacity building and the awareness is very important. And social media is the quickest and the rightest way to spread everything very quickly in a very cheaper way. And we should involve youth as well. So Enrique, next time I would like if we should involve a lot of youth involvement in it, because the youth is the future of our country. Youth is the future of our earth. So, and there's 65% of bulge of youth right now in Pakistan. So youth involvement is very important. So they should know, they should be aware of where the environment is taking us, where the other solid waste management is taking us, where the pollution is taking us, which indicators we need to focus, so that youth aggressively work with the help of presenting themselves on different platforms. So I would request, and Ricky, we should have a platform where should we invite all the technology, the giants and the new innovations, so that we all should know what's cooking in the other part of the world, and everybody should bring up their success stories, and we should learn from others. So that's my thought for today.
Thank you very much, Salma. I think all of you have raised critical points. I think as a final remark from my side, circular economy is about restructuring the whole economy. It's not about a piecemeal intervention here and there. And in that regard, it requires all players coming on board and addressing it at every level, policy, operational, planning, and all other levels with the right level of engagement of stakeholders. And as Susanne mentioned earlier, I think it's not only product innovation, it has to also include process innovation, product and process innovation. And our youths are very much creative and innovative. Just look around what different youth groups are trying to do, utilizing the digital infrastructure for coming up with new ideas and implementing them on the ground. So we have a lot of potential there. I think a key ingredient missing, at least from the African context, which is also a case in most developing countries, is the weak university industry linkage that exists across developing countries is a major constraint factor in terms of moving forward on product and process innovation, which is highly needed in circular economy transition. So in that regard, we need to bring all these elements together. I think this session was rich in terms of sharing experience, lessons, and generating some suggestions and ideas for future consideration. And for that, I would like to thank all the panelists for their excellent contribution, and also thank UNCTAD and its partners for organizing this session. And for the final closing remark, I pass over to Enrique. Enrique, over to you.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you for chairing the session. Thank you also to all the panelists who brought in great suggestions for further work. It's a very challenging work, but we're getting many important points here. For example, the African Union Conference on Industrialization is one important entry point for those discussions. And also, I thank you, Saima, for raising the youth flag. Everything we're discussing now will probably be implemented by the youth. So definitely bring them more on board in future events. And I would like to bring also your attention to an important conference that Professor Konstantinos pasted in the chat, which will aggregate a lot of the thinking heads around circular economy in the north and in the south in Greece in the middle of this year. So that is to say, we have a pause now before the next panel, or the session 2 will start in exactly 15 minutes. So it's a quick pause. The session 2 will be on plastic pollution mitigation strategies. So we will mute the microphones until then, and then we will start the session. I'll introduce the moderator, Mahesh Sugatan, and then we continue the seminar for today. Thank you all, and see you very soon.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome all. Once again, we are in a session 2 of this seminar. The session 2 is focused on plastic pollution mitigation strategy, a topic that has been very hot on political and practitioner agendas, both at a national and international level lately, with a lot of developments. We will have this session being moderated by Mr. Mahesh Sugatan, who is a senior expert on international trade and environment, and he is also the co-author of many of the leading studies on the global governance of plastics, especially its trade dimensions. Mahesh currently works as a senior policy advisor at the Forum for Trade, Environment and SDGs, the TESS Forum, which has been brokering a lot of progress and discussions here in Geneva. He's based also at the Graduate Institute University. Mahesh, without further ado, we see that all the participants, the panelists are already in. I'll give you the word so that you can introduce the panel and start the discussions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Enrique. I hope everybody can hear me. Great.
Yes.
So thank you, Enrique. Dear colleagues, it's a pleasure to welcome you all to the second panel session of this research seminar that will look at plastic mitigation strategies. Thank you to UNCTAD, Enrique and colleagues for organizing this timely event. I have on the panel today a truly impressive cast of speakers from a diverse range of backgrounds, from experts from academia, international organizations, to circular economy and private sector-based practitioners. A few points of housekeeping before I give the floor to our first speaker. Each speaker will have about 5 to 7 minutes, and you will hear a gentle reminder from me once you cross the 5-minute mark. Depending on our time available after each presentation, I may pose a specific question around the presentation to the speaker, something in a light discussion mode. Please keep your replies on topic and for no more than 2 minutes, preferably at most, before we go on to the next speaker. After the presentations, we will also have a general round of Q&A where Enrique and myself may raise a few additional questions to get the ball rolling. And we'll also be gathering some additional questions from the audience. I would also request members of the audience during the Q&A in the chat to state the name of the speaker to whom the question is addressed, or to keep it as an open-ended question, in which case I would invite any of our speakers who would be interested to respond. So I'm really looking forward to a very lively and interactive session. Without any further delay, let me introduce our first panel speaker, Mr. Chris White. Chris is a circular economy expert and is also the South Africa country representative and executive committee member at the Africa Circular Economy Network, the ACEN. He will be speaking to us today on plastic recycling opportunities in developing countries. Chris, the floor is yours, and I believe you have a PowerPoint to share as well.
Thank you. Yes, I'm basically going to try and look at a quick sort of introduction into what I believe is sort of a broader aspect with regards to the plastic waste issues. I was a technical on the technical committee with SMEP, looking at some of the recent applications. But I really want to try and look at understanding plastics recycling and looking at opportunities in developing economies. And just to show you there, I have a wide range of hats. With the African Circular Economy Network as a director, also with the ASIN Foundation, but I also wear a number of hats in private sector applications. So it's about commercials as well. So what I'm trying to look at doing is to say, listen, we do have an issue. So if you look at developing economies, we certainly have a problem. Whether you're in South Africa, Manila, Southeast Asia, anywhere in Africa, there's definitely a problem. But we're not alone. If we look at the developed economies, a lot of this ends up in the same sort of issue. And there's huge issues around waste management, understanding the problems there. But we're looking at plastic waste here as one particular focus. So we can prevent it. We can say no to plastics. The reality is that's not going to happen. Plastic production is set to increase by 40% over the next decade. We need to find solutions and applications now. We can reduce plastics. There's some scope in this. We can ban some bags, plastic bags, and particular components, or we can design better. But if you look at design, for example, in the bottle side of things, a bottle that was 23 grams a decade ago is now 9 grams. That's fantastic. It benefits the packaging industry, but it's still going to kill your turtles. So while the developed economy industry is cashing in on a bad thing, we're seeing these fantastic shoes from a well-known branded shoe company and ocean plastic sunglasses that I pretty much can't afford. We do know where it's coming from. And the reality is that if we look at the work through the likes of Prof. Jambek et al., we know where the waste is coming from. But what we need to look at is that in developing nations, we don't need shoes and sunglasses. We need education, health, infrastructure, jobs, food, energy. So the way forward really is to, first of all, put away the begging bowl. Stop looking to the developed nations to try and bail us out of this. What works in the developing countries does not always work in developed worlds, or vice versa. So we need to look at local solutions and applications that work here. And the reason why is that we have substantially different socioeconomic dynamics. And we don't have the structures, resources, and systems of the developed nations. What we do have is we have the needs, the desire, skills, and the innovation and innovative ability to drive solutions that will work for developing nations. We need to unlock those value chains to create products that we need to cater for our own rapidly expanding population and drive green procurement and local production. So we have all of the innovative solutions for all plastic waste. They're available without exception. Do we need foreign investment in international technologies? Yes, no, we need to work together. That's always up for debate. But what we do need is we need the legislative and regulatory frameworks that stop hindering local innovation and looking at product development and application. We need producers to take real responsibility. A lot of the EPR stuff that we're seeing really needs to look at the base of the pyramid as opposed to what's happening with the producers. And we need to create markets for products through supply chain management and material specification. It's not complicated. So we need to transition to a circular economy where waste is a resource. It's not about recycling. There's a very naive view of recycling. And I always use this picture. If any of you have ever had kids gone through preschool, that's an old milk bottle that now becomes an elephant. So if you think recycling is irrelevant, then we need to change that narrative. So using waste as a resource delivers on social upliftment, skills development, economic development, energy, water, wastewater, infrastructure and housing, manufacturing, food security. So we need to try and drive that change that allows us to be able to look at creating an opportunity to achieve our sustainable development goals. Education is a prime example. If you look at early childhood development, 80% of a child's brain potential is developed by the age of 4. There are awesome opportunities to be able to look at recycled materials to provide those numeracy and tactile development stages. We have opportunities looking at health, nutrition, and food security. The reality is at the moment we move from the land and move to the cities, and then we starve. But there are solutions in terms of opportunities there that also look at nutrient recycling and other components. We have a number of different applications in terms of using these materials for different building materials, whether we're using tires, plastic, sand, glass, or other components to create components that can offset conventional linear type model applications. And these can be used in a multitude of different applications, from furniture to outdoor structures, marine applications, and building materials. So there's no reason why these things need to end up in the environment. Some of the stuff we're doing at the moment, for example, is looking at road infrastructure. We design, develop dry and hot melt systems that are taking up to 45% of single to mixed plastic components into road infrastructure. These are cheaper, stronger, and better, and again, creates a market for the local opportunities. But we need to look at the plastic issue with affordable technology for developing nations. There's a lot of problematic plastics. So recycling is cherry picking. We tend to pick out the nice clean stuff. But there are opportunities to look at issues around energy generation. So this is one of the small scale pyrolysis units that we've developed. They can come out in different infrastructure applications, bricks and blocks, paving stones and retainers. These are all part of the ocean paver system that we have there, which are made from 100% waste materials that create local opportunities in the market. Energy is the big issue. So, we can still look at recovery, depending on circular economy circles. Everyone's very anti-energy, but developing economies are very, very energy poor. We have over 650 million people in Africa without access to energy. South Africa has 40,000 megawatt output. Nigeria has 10% of that. But we are 68% in South Africa of the entire African generation needs, and yet we're only 12%, South Korea has 3 times our application. So we need to put all these things into context, and energy is key. So energy is the basis of all secondary development. We cannot develop secondary recycling, materials beneficiation, manufacturing, food processing, agri-processing, water management, etc., without energy. So let's focus on those and ensure that we get that before it gets into the sea. Innovation is key. Let's make that happen. So there are sustainable solutions and smart opportunities for plastic. They're not only possible, they're economically viable. So we need to wake up and make sure that it happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, for the visual and yet powerful presentation, which really brings home to us the need to look at the solutions to the plastic pollution crisis from a different perspective and focus on tapping waste as a resource to meet diverse needs in developing countries, such as energy and infrastructure building materials. One question on your presentation was, what do you think is the most important barrier that impedes the scaling up of these kind of models? Because we do hear about a lot of these examples of different enterprises doing interesting things with plastic waste. But what do you think is needed to actually bring these sort of solutions to scale and more entrepreneurs really getting involved in using plastic? Is it regulatory frameworks? Is it financing? Is it something else?
Yeah, Mahesh, I think that there's many different applications that we need to look at, and none of them are insurmountable. So policy is one critical key issue, but it's not just policy. We have lots of great policies in Africa. We don't implement them very well. What we need to do is we need to create demand. So governments should be creating an enabling environment. They should not be playing in the private sector space. The opportunity is that we could look at a just transition in terms of the energy profile or infrastructure profile by looking at issues around supply chain management, procurement, green procurement, preferential procurement, material specification, and ensuring that our archaic systems of standards, certification, and compliance are opened up to allow for different materials.
Great. Thank you, Chris. And I'd like to give the floor now to our second speaker, Ms. Diana Baraklau. Diana is a senior economist at UNCTAD at the Division on Globalization and Development Strategies. She's written extensively on trade and plastics issues, including being the co-author of a recent study that's put figure in plastics trade at about more than $1 trillion a year. In addition, she also manages the development of UNCTAD plastics trade database that provides an excellent overview of global, regional, and country trade flows in various categories of plastics. Diana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mahesh. You've received my slides this morning. Can you put the first slide on, please?
Let me check if I have the slides. I don't think I've received the slides. Henrique,
Okay, I will find it. Do you want to move to the next speaker while I get my slides?
Okay, sure. That's, yeah.
Otherwise, we'll waste time. So.
Okay, great. So, okay, let's go now to Mr. Gadzikano. Let me just introduce Mr. Gadzikano. Sorry, have his bio. Yes, so thank you. Mr. Gadzikano is a lecturer in chemistry at the Department of Chemistry at Chinhoyi University of Technology in Zimbabwe. His university is involved in a project in Zimbabwe to establish a manufacturing facility for plastic roof tiles with solar features to address household needs. Gadzikano will be bringing in a more practical view of actions, technical or policy, which have helped to mitigate plastic-based pollution in the context of Zimbabwe, with some interesting case examples on waste and energy from Zimbabwe. Gadzikano, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mahesh. I'm Gadzikano, as Mahesh has introduced me. We have been awarded a SMEP grant together with Chinhoyi University of Technology. I'm actually a part of the company that is working with Chinhoyi University. We do aim to develop a plastic waste value chain through where we actually get plastic waste collected, repurposed, and then remanufactured into roof tiles. So that's what we really seek to do. But maybe before I go into those details, I just want to give you an overview of the plastic waste issue in Zimbabwe. So basically the plastic waste is collected by municipalities here in Zimbabwe. And the municipalities, they collect this plastic waste in what is referred to as a mixed bag indiscriminate collection system. So where you have almost all your municipal solid waste in a single bag. So everything is in one bag. And then that plastic waste is then taken into the landfills. So that is if you do have your waste collected, and that does happen once a week, I think on average. And maybe to give you an overview of one of the cities, which is Harare, we actually produce about 22,000 tons of plastic waste that is in a year, and about 11,000 tons is what gets collected and sent into landfills. And of that 11,000 that is collected, only 800 tons is recovered for recycling. So which is a very, very little. And a good amount of it, which is about 2,800 of plastic waste that is produced in Zimbabwe, it gets burnt, and about 5,700 tons is buried, and close to 1,000 of this waste is illegally disposed. So here in Zimbabwe, the recycling business is still at a very, very low start. Very little is being done. But however, there are quite a number of players that have come into the scene. We have people who are recycling plastic waste into new material. So the new material that people are making include trash cans. This include piping, issues to do with recycling bins, as well as a lot of construction material, that is pavers, roofing tiles, as well as bricks. These are what are actually being made at the moment here in Zimbabwe. And we also have another sector that is also involved in recycling plastic waste. And this is the sector that is involved in the waste to energy processes. What I can also tell you is that in Zimbabwe, we have had quite a number of people who have been in this business for quite a while, and who have actually moved from making use of recycled waste and going back into making use of virgin plastic, simply because according to them, it is more cheaper and more convenient because they are getting the quality of plastic which they want. So they're saying it's quite expensive to sort out the waste when you get it from the landfills, right? Maybe the other issue that I may want to highlight to you is also on the type of plastics that we are actually having here in Zimbabwe. So the plastic that is really being recycled involves LDPE, HDPE, and thin films. And we have, in my view, the largest amount of plastic waste that we get is PET. And that PET has no market here in Zimbabwe. And because it doesn't have market, those that are actually collecting it, they are collecting it with the lowest price from those that are selling the PET plastic. And those that are collecting it, they're actually exporting it to South Africa, where they are actually recycling it back to the bottle and also to other markets. So because of that, you find out that we have a lot of PET plastic lying around here in Zimbabwe. So maybe in terms of policy and legislation here in Zimbabwe that has been introduced over the years, we do have what is called the Integrated Solid Waste Management Plan, which was put in place in 2014. So it addresses issues to do with separation of waste and also solid waste management and other issues. And also the Zimbabwe government introduced the plastic bag levy in 2014. But what you would realize is that the plastic bag levy did not really reduce the amount of plastic waste consumption, simply because there are no alternatives at the moment. And actually, the government of Zimbabwe is actually announced that by the end of December 2022, Zimbabwe will not be using single-use plastic bags. So in other words, the plastic bag is going to be banned from use here in Zimbabwe from December 2022. However, what I have realized is that the government is also not even proffering any new solutions in terms of what people can use as substitutes. So nothing is actually being done in that front at the moment. And we are only going to be banning that plastic bag without giving consumers anything else to use. And in my view, that might actually bring in a lot of problems. Then there are also other regulations which the government of Zimbabwe has put in place, where they say the generators as well as the handlers of these plastic waste or any waste material, as it were, should actually get licenses. And what you would realize is that the government, or rather the Zimbabwean economy, is highly informalized at the moment. And because it is highly informalized, very few of these people that are involved in the plastic waste value chain can get these licenses, can afford these licenses. So because of this, it is actually going to limit the number of players who are going to be involved in recycling. So there is also another legislation which the government of Zimbabwe has put in place, where they say the producer of plastic waste should take the responsibility on making sure that they take it out of the environment. So this has actually helped to a great extent in the sense that some of the major producers of plastic waste, especially PET plastic waste, they have formed a company here in Zimbabwe, which is actually responsible for getting this type of material out of the environment. So maybe to just put it there, I feel maybe some of the policies that need to be put in place here in Zimbabwe include policies that promote private players in waste management. I think the government has to try and make sure that they incentivize everyone who wants to be involved in this particular field. And also there is need, I guess, for involvement of stakeholders, especially the residents. I think this is quite important, as these are the people who save, who are saved rather by the waste management system. So I think it's important that they get involved, not from the perspective of them being just the ratepayers who are just there to pay for a service, but they need to be involved in terms of whatever is happening. And there's also probably a need for the government of Zimbabwe to establish more decentralized, maybe what I can call recycling centers. There should be more partnerships between, I think, tertiary institutions and the people who are involved in recycling. I think that will help in capacity enhancement. Because what I've realized is that there is a lot of research that is going on in universities, but this research is not going out there. And they just do the research and then publish the papers. And a lot of that can actually help if there is linkages between tertiary institutions as well as the people that are involved in the recycling business. I think that's all I had.
Great.
Mahesh.
Thank you, Gadzikano. I just raised one specific question, which I also believe that Henrique had also raised earlier in our communication. How do you think this avoids the logic of using scrap or waste as a model? Because isn't the logic that, well, I mean, the more plastic waste you have, the greater the raw material or inputs that go into the business model. So how do you sort of, many people would say, well, you're actually having an incentive for greater generation of plastic waste. I mean, even if it is used, even if it gets into a useful end use. So what would be your response to the critics?
I think to an extent, I think there is a need to avoid that logic which creates the demand for waste. Mm-hmm. Because if you look at it, I think based on the waste hierarchy, the preferred method for waste management is waste prevention, and then maybe followed by waste minimization. This is what is preferred. Mm-hmm. And I think the conversion then of plastic waste into other valuable products and as well as resources such as energy should, in my view, it should be considered in a policy framework where you are saying the waste that has now been avoided, I mean, that has not been avoided, rather is the one that it needs to be used in these processes. I think what we need to probably continue to encourage is issues to do with maybe the circular economy principles, where I think we try to make sure that the plastic that is already in the system is the one that we continue to use, and we minimize the production of this of new plastic waste. That is actually my view in terms of this.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Gadzikano. So I believe we can go now to Diana. Diana, I think you have your presentation.
Thank you.
Online.
Yes, I'm going to share my screen. Please just let me know if you can see it.
Thanks, Annalise. I can also share my screen if you rather do it that way. All right, super. Thank you. So thank you very much, everybody, for inviting me here today. My UNCTAD colleagues had wanted me to speak earlier because we would be giving more of a global view to complement the national strategies that the other speakers are presenting. But I think actually the fact that we changed the order a little bit actually works quite well, because now what we heard is of two very interesting national strategies. And what I would like to present here is the complementary view of what is needed at the global level to help support these efforts to reduce plastic pollution. And I've called the title here Plastic Dependency or Alternative Opportunities. And the dependency is something which is coming through my trade data that I'm interested to share with you. The picture on the right of the screen of this submerged iceberg, we all know the thing with the iceberg is that the biggest part is the part that you don't see. And I think this is very interesting in the plastic debate that, we have a lot of great efforts being made on plastic waste and plastic pollution, but actually the production of plastic is absolutely enormous. And these are the things that we don't always see to the same degree. So if I can have the next slide, please. So just one of the things, I just want to very quickly with this slide, give a sense of what are the multilateral support resources that can be called upon in this, in the effort that is being taken place by countries and by firms and by civil society in the efforts to tackle plastic pollution and also to make this transition to a sustainable and greener future. So this is a slide, in fact, Mahesh, I think you may produce this slide. So thank you for that. It should have a citation on the bottom of your publication, but we'll make sure we get that in the final version. But what we see here in the global governance landscape, we've divided this into environmental governance, where we have all the agreements that I'm sure you're all very familiar with, including the Paris Agreement or Basel Conventions. But I particularly want to draw your attention at the bottom of this line, where we have the national and regional environmental laws, which are the regulations that, for example, our previous speaker from Zimbabwe was citing, and then also regional cooperation initiatives. And I think that the regional and the global initiatives are really important. The pollution does not respect national borders. And what I'm going to show in my next slides is that plastic production and consumption is way beyond national. It's a global phenomenon. So we really need to have these global complementary regulations alongside what countries are doing. Then the second column we've got of trade governance. So you might think, why are we focusing so much on trade? Well, one is we UNCTAD, trade and development, but also trade accounts for a huge amount of the production and consumption of plastic per year. It's about 340 million metric tons of plastic is produced every year in trade, and it's a business that's worth more than $1 trillion. So what we know is trade is huge, and trade is a very big business when it comes to plastic. And so any deals to cope with plastic pollution have to have trade, at the heart of them. The other reason we look at trade also, not only because we're UNCTAD, but also because the fact that there's no official data gathered on the production or the consumption of plastic meant that trade is one of the little microscopes that we can use to try and really see what is happening at the national and the global level, because countries report through their customs officers when goods enter or exit a country, they report the product. And so we managed to measure it in that way. So it's not the only measure, but for the moment, it's our best official measure that we have. So this has been a way that we could really see what was happening at the global level, but it's also national because we're seeing what's coming in and out of countries. And the thing about trade is that it accounts for a huge amount of the plastic that is produced by other estimates that reinforce it. And also it's a very powerful policy lever. So it is a lever that can be used. From the UNCTAD perspective, my colleagues will also tell you that there are trade opportunities to be made from alternatives to plastic and substitutes to plastic. And this is something that they will address. I won't speak about that, but the trade, we just want to make the point that the trade story also offers opportunities that haven't maybe been considered as much in the past as they should be now. I would add to the trade story that we also need to be thinking about other complementary policies such as finance and research and development, and I will get there later. But trade is absolutely essential, and it's not only because we're here in Geneva where we have the World Trade Organization. There are many reasons to put trade at the center of this discussion. Then the final column, we have other international economic cooperations such as the World Bank and the regional development banks, and I would say they're absolutely essential for any kind of move to transition into alternative or substitutes to plastic, or indeed to cope with the impact of existing plastic and waste, for example. So if I may have my next slide, please. So let's think about why is it so difficult to deal with the problem of plastic pollution, and why also we might be thinking that there are opportunities in this whole economic sector. So one of the reasons that they're two sides of the same coin in a way, that the industry is enormous. As we said, it's $1 trillion industry and millions of metric tons of product. So what we've done here in the UNCTAD database, we've worked this out over a huge amount of effort over some years with colleagues at the Graduate Institute, including Mahesh and Carolyn, who may be in this meeting, and the UNCTAD stats team, of which we have 4 or 5 people who have been working very hard on this. What we managed to do is to look at plastic as an economic product. So we're trying to really understand the economics of it and how plastic fits into different production processes within countries. So the focus that we get mostly in the media is on waste. Now the waste is the green line at the bottom of that chart. And waste is actually, while it's terribly important environmentally, it's actually pretty small in terms of the values. The iceberg I had on my page 1, it's like waste is the thing at the top. But look, you see that the trade of intermediate forms of plastic and intermediate manufactured plastic, this is a manufacturing meeting, isn't it? And then final manufactured plastic goods, it's grown immensely and it's huge. And there are good reasons why it's grown so much. You know, plastic's an incredibly useful and versatile and cheap product. And many countries have used plastic as a way to diversify their economies, to get out of traditional agriculture and into manufacturing, producing products that are desired all over the world and that are useful and that have created incomes that have lifted, you know, countries out of poverty. But it's also highly problematic. And that's what we're now thinking about, how to deal with some of the problems. May I have the next slide, please? So what I want to think about here, this is why I put in my title, you know, how dependent have we become on plastic? So this you know, it's a lot of information here, so you won't be able to get it all now, but I hope that afterwards, maybe you'll read this in more, with more leisure. But this is a table showing the countries for whom plastic imports are more than 8% of their total imports. Now, the first thing to say is that this accounts for 30 countries in the world. So there's more than 30 countries in the world for whom their total imports, 8% of them are plastic. I'm not talking fossil fuels here. I'm just talking plastic inputs and then those other products that we said, the intermediate goods or the final goods. Now, of those 30 countries who are importing more than 8% of their total imports of plastic, of those 30 countries, 28 of them are developing countries or countries in transition, and quite a few are LDCs. When we looked at the figure for just 5% of total imports, we had more than 80 countries. Okay, so that you see that's huge. More than 80 countries in the world are importing so much plastic that it accounts for 5% of their total imports. Now, so that's the first hint that we're going to get, that any kind of change in dealing with the regulation of plastic or the reliance on plastic is going to be difficult. Okay, so it's a challenge for everybody. The good news is that, you know, governments, industry, civil society, everybody does actually want to try and address this challenge. So that's a positive thing, but let's not kid ourselves that it will be easy. Now, thinking about the composition of what kind of plastic is imported is very important. And I'm going to say this is new for us and it's still a working area. So, you know, we're raising as many questions as we have answers. But the first thing, so just look at the first couple of countries on the list here. We've got Cambodia, Myanmar, Dominican Republic, Sri Lanka, Costa Rica, El Salvador. These are all developing countries that are importing a lot of plastic. And they're using it, they're importing different kinds of plastic for different goods. So Sri Lanka, oops, okay, I've got 2 minutes, so I'm almost done, Mahesh, thank you. So looking at Cambodia at the top, we see that a big part of their imports are intermediate manufactured plastic goods. And it's the same also for the second country. The third country is importing more final manufactured goods. So it's interesting to think, how are these imports important for the structure of your economy? Because any country that wants to deal with plastic pollution has to understand where is it coming from. And every country is going to have a different profile. But let's just, if we just go to the next slide, thank you. Let's think, keeping in mind what we saw for the imports, now look at the exports. So in this case, Cambodia has slid down quite a bit to the bottom. It's sort of halfway through this chart now. This is countries where exports of plastic are more than 6% of their global exports. So Cambodia has got between 8 and 9% of its total exports of plastic, but they are primarily final manufactured goods. So this is goods, we don't know for sure yet because we're still examining it, but it looks like, importing intermediate goods, exporting final goods. And this is a way of job creation and income revenue generation. And it's the same for many of these other countries. Sri Lanka, for example, exporting a lot of final manufactured goods. Now, this is just the share, okay? There are other countries in the lower down the list. So China, for example, is an obvious one. There are other countries down the list that are exporting much bigger volumes, but it's the share of the total that I'm looking at here. Togo is at the top of the list. That's quite surprising. We think it's because Togo is a regional hub, so it's exporting throughout the rest of the region. The point I just want to make is that, the composition is subtle, it's multifaceted, it's different for every country, and it's going to be a big deal to try and address this. Can I have the next slide, please? That is my final slide. So if you want to read some more information about all our work here, please look at any of these references. And I just will finish by saying that we've been focusing on trade in plastic, but any kind of efforts to either transform and transition the industry, or to move into alternatives, or to follow the other policies that have been mentioned by my previous speakers, we also need to think about the finance, like how to pay for these transitions. And for that, we need to be thinking about what's happening with ODA, or with development banks and financial markets. And this is work that I'm actively pursuing right now. And regional initiatives, for example, to promote green procurement, or to promote unified and regional responses, both in addressing pollution and addressing the value chains in which we're seeing this production and consumption patterns. So I'm going to finish now. Thank you very much for your attention, and look forward to the rest of the meeting.
Great. Thank you, Diana, for your excellent points highlighting the importance of trade and also what could be done from a macro or global perspective. Now, we all know, that trade, you have the WTO here in Geneva discussing plastics in the informal dialogue on plastics. There's this joint initiative underway. What, in your opinion, could the WTO contribute to this debate, and especially for our audience who may not be very familiar with what the WTO is doing exactly on this issue?
Sure. Well, Mahesh, I work for UNCTAD, so it's it's not really for me to tell WTO what they should be doing, but we're working together on many of these issues. So I think there's a process underway right now, I think, about clarifying the codes for plastic and trying to be more systematic about how these are collected. There's a huge amount of plastic that's embedded in other products. So it's not meant, for example, my glasses that I'm wearing right now, these are made of plastic, but it's not obvious that they were recorded as plastic when they were imported or exported. They might have been recorded under the category called glasses. So it's the whole point is that the HS codes were designed to help countries collect customs. They were not designed to measure the plastic content of products. But so I think that's something that's very important right now. Maybe my colleagues who are working on this will no doubt have other things to add. And what we do see is that a lot of countries are initiating trade policies, on a one-by-one basis, particularly small islands who are very heavily impacted by plastic pollution. But most of these policies are focusing on, for example, plastic bags. And, as I mentioned at the beginning, that's like the tip of the iceberg on this. This is not the whole iceberg.
Great. Thank you, Diana. That's very, very, very insightful and helpful. Let me now turn to our fourth speaker, Mr. Dinesh Barbary. Dinesh is the director for Rift Valley Adventures, a leading outdoor company in East Africa. And he's also the co-founder of the Flip Floppy project, which has made the world's first recycled plastic sailing dhow And I mean, it's a really beautiful dhow, I must say, Dinesh, because I saw the pictures, you know, on the website. Dinesh has also been involved with innovative approaches to tackling plastic pollution in Kenya for over 15 years. So Dinesh, hand over the floor to you.
Thank you very much. It's Deepesh, but thank you for that introduction.
Sorry, I misspelled it.
Not a problem, not a problem. Thank you very much, and it's been very interesting to hear all the other speakers, and also to listening to the previous seminar. Essentially, we're a circular economy movement with a vision to see a world without single-use plastics. In order to have, we gave birth to this movement by creating the world's first recycled plastic sailing dhow, which is 9 meters in length and weighs over 7 tons, entirely made of HDPE, LDPE, and lots of old toothbrushes and PP. It was critical. I mean, and picking up a little bit on what the previous seminar was giving a lot of relevance to, was the importance of the informal sector in Africa. This was absolutely critical for us, and it was absolutely critical for us that it was a locally relevant symbol. So this was never meant to be a new high-tech boat. This was meant to be a traditional boat that is still very relevant to the communities where we work in, and is something that people can associate and affiliate and take pride in. And that was absolutely critical, I think, to establishing the campaign and growing the movement over time. Speaking of small islands, this is exactly where we established the project. We are based in, our flagship project is based in the north coast of Kenya on the Lamu Island, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and has an ancient culture of trade over the last couple of thousands of years, trading as far as India and China and the Middle East. As one of our co-founders likes to say, is before we just had dhow sailing across the ocean, now instead we have plastics. The key for us to take this is we tried and tested this boat, and it was a strong flagship. It has sailed several thousand kilometers across the Indian Ocean. We took it as far as Lake Victoria, which is the largest freshwater lake in Africa, and circumnavigated Lake Victoria. One, to demonstrate local solutions to a global problem, to use it as a flagship, to inspire and engage, and also to continuously bring importance and relevance to local innovative solutions. And that's very important, with community at the heart of everything of what we do. So a lot of our emphasis in what we're doing right now is to try and build capacity of local community waste management schemes, whether they are on the shores of Lake Victoria or coast of Kenya. We have taken an approach, a full systems approach to the problem, where we believe strongly in education and innovation and influence, and tackling the problem holistically through these 3 pillars in the organization. Our flagship project in Lamu was to try and establish a material recovery center for plastics across the entire archipelago, to enhance the R&D for boat building, and also to establish a heritage boat building school. And through this, actually, we were very fortunate to be a recipient of the SMEP grant that has allowed us now to establish this pilot scheme on the Lamu archipelago. So we've just completed the first phase, and as part of this was to undertake a baseline survey to identify the hotspots in the Western Indian Ocean, particularly in the north coast of Kenya, where this has not been done. There is no data to actually base it on. We know there's a problem. Through our initial baseline, we conducted a study across about 12 sites across the archipelago, in mangroves as well as on beaches, using a standing stock method. Not surprising, over 70% of what we were identifying was plastics. Interestingly, was about 62% of those plastics were identified as recyclable. A large quantity of that actually being hard plastics in certain areas. We also have undertaken a community survey to just sort of gauge knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs towards plastic, awareness, general awareness. And again, not surprisingly, almost 98% of the respondents were very well aware of the plastic problem. Of that, though, not many people actually knew what the impact of that problem is in terms of health and in terms of the environment. You know, anecdotally speaking, what's very interesting, when we were doing our baseline survey, we were in a small village and we were walking across, and there was a cemetery, and there was an open football field, and there was an open dump site, and there was a cow chewing on the plastics, and there was a goat dead in the environment right there. And of course, a lot of the little children from the village were running around, and they were coming to see who these people are in their village, etc. And when we got talking to these children, we said, you know, what's all this plastic? And they started telling us the stories, and we pointed at this goat and said, how did this goat die? And they said, oh, it's eaten too much taka, too much waste. So the knowledge is there, and I don't think it's that much different to what we refer to as the global north. People are aware of the problem and will tweet about it and we'll put it on our Instagram, but we'll still go quickly and pick up our coffee cup, our single-use coffee cup, or eat at a fast food chain and have single-use, knowing that we have a problem on our hands. So whilst we talk about, you know, low levels of awareness in the global south, I don't necessarily think that's the case. It's a question of what do we do with this problem? And, you know, as Chris rightfully pointed out, we do have a problem. And yes, we do need to be looking into redesigning, changing of manufacturing, innovative alternatives. But at the same time, we know we have an existing serious problem in our oceans and on our land. And what do we do, and how do we deal with this problem as we continue to investigate how we can look at reducing our reliance on plastics, and particularly single-use plastics. I also agree that, you know, plastic has a fundamental role to play in society. And it's all a question of how we bring this back into a circular economy model and eliminate those that cannot be part of a circular economy model. We have established a small recycling facility on the Lamu Islands. It's been quite a challenge. We're dealing with an island that is fairly isolated. The only form of transport on these islands is boats and donkeys. So moving 8 tons of extrusion and recycling equipment onto a small island in itself was quite a challenge. The issue is that Lamu is a typical example, I would say, in Lamu, a small island developing state where there is no solid waste management at the moment, but it is also a recipient of plastics from across the oceans. And it does beg the question at this stage as, you know, whose problem is this really? We're dealing with low-income communities who have very small amounts of disposable income, and we're dealing with communities that don't have traditionally do not throw things away. Everything is used until it cannot be used anymore. Yet we are this recipient of a global problem. And, you know, one could argue in terms of financing and put the same argument as to climate change. Essentially, we are victims of other areas, other geographical locations, industrial practices, and we are victims of this in many ways. So whilst, yes, I believe that we need to find sustainable, commercial-driven opportunities to deal with the plastics, we also have this problem of continuously receiving plastics from across the oceans. And I think this needs to be factored into how we address this if we're truly going to address this as well. Our factory has a capacity of processing almost up to 12 tons of plastic. So we are able to make lumber and beams And this has been one of our core flagships, is to see how we can create, is there a viability to use plastic as an alternative material to boat building from wood and fiberglass? And this has been part of the R&D that we have been scaling up right now. We have the first boat, and she's sturdy, and she's proved that it is very viable. And it has also been a very strong flagship project in terms of demonstrating to people that there is a possibility of using this. What we are also now examining is to look at items made from recycled plastic, particularly HDPE and PP, that have multiple purposes. So if we think about a traditional boat, essentially a large part of that boat, the hull of that boat, is lumber, planks of wood. We know that planks of wood have multiple uses in all sorts of areas as well. And this can be an alternative to the local reliance on wood. The same with a beam, which could be a fence post. It could be a structural part of the boat. It could be used for a ceiling thing. So we are now trying to accelerate our R&D to refine our processes to manufacture locally relevant products that may have multiple uses, but again, with the key flagship on boat building and traditional boat building. And when we speak about the informal sector, it is really, really important that we recognize that we are working in a blooming youth, and Africa is very unique in that sense, that the majority of our population now are youth. The majority of our sector is what we call informal sector. How do we retain relevance to these structures, and at the same time as well, how do we ensure that we fit in with traditional values of heritage? The boat for us was that symbol, and I think that has allowed everyone to say, wow, plastics have a part in my life, and and I can understand where this belongs. And that's been a very critical part of what we're doing. In terms of policy, Flip-Floppy is also one of our core pillars, has been to advocate for a regional approach to harmonizing on legislation that addresses plastic pollution. So we've been working alongside various law firms. We've put together a bill that now we are pushing to at the East African regional level to ban unnecessary single-use plastics using the EU model. We've also been working at a local level. LAMU has finally taken the initiative to address and to put together a solid waste management policy. So we've been trying to shape that and bring in our expertise and our experience and hopefully shape something that's locally relevant as well. I think I probably have reached my time, haven't I?
Yes, thank you.
This gives you a little bit of a dip into our waste problem.
Great. Thank you, Dipesh. Thanks a lot, and that's very interesting story about Flip-Floppy that you shared with us, and it's also truly inspiring on the diversity of uses that you can put plastic waste to. One question I had, we've got some questions from audience which I'll raise in the Q&A, but one specific question I had was also on the end of life aspects. So essentially, I gather when you're using plastic waste to manufacture the sail, you're effectively locking in the single-use plastic away for a number of years, right? For a single use. But what happens at the end of life? Can you somehow recycle this again? Can you use it again, or does it?
Yeah. So essentially, all parts of in our particular process with the lumber and the beams, etc., that plastic can be recycled over and over again. It may not be structurally sound enough for the use in a boat, but it can certainly go into being a fence pole, as an example. I do also want to bring up one final issue is, whilst the problem of PET is a big problem, and it is not a problem that can be locally processed. But because we've taken an approach as an organization that we are tackling plastic pollution as a whole, we are now stockpiling large quantities of PET, trying to discuss this with the bigger buyers, etc., and finding ourselves in a bit of a hard spot where we're so geographically isolated, it is not economically valuable for any of the bigger suppliers to come and collect these smaller quantities. So now we are trying to create models with the communities where we can get to the quantities, whether it's baling, whether it's shredding, that will then attract the large buyers as well. So we are trying to tackle all areas of plastics. Sorry.
Great. Thank you. Excellent. That's great, Dipesh. So let me now turn to our last and final speaker, Ms. Zeni Yo. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Ms. Zeni Yo is a global circular packaging manager at Danone and a strategic foresight board member at the Circular Economy Alliance. An economist by training, she's also previously co-founded the Circular Economy Symposium at Harvard University. Mrs. A, over to you.
For the kind invitation to this webinar. I think I had the benefit of hindsight of listening to all the amazing experiences of the panelists before. So I'll introduce myself first. You can call me Z. I know my name is a bit hard, but so yes, I'm part of the global circular packaging team at Danone. And as you may know, Danone is a fast-moving consumer goods company. With three main portfolios. We sell water, as well as specialized nutrition, as well as plant-based and dairy products. So the global circular packaging team is really founded because the company has a very high focus on sustainability. We feel the pressures coming from regulation, but also from consumers. But more and more so these days, business needs to be combined with good, otherwise we will not be sustainable in the long term. So my team, we support the various country business units, so the brands on the ground, to achieve the circular packaging targets that we have set for ourselves as the company. So at a global level, we have made several pledges on using more recycled content, more renewable content. But at the same time, we also have collection goals. And at a country level, some brands have gone further than the global goals in terms of, for example, Aqua in Indonesia, which I work very closely with. They have a recover more than we use goal by 2025. So this goes above and beyond what the global minimum is set. So my portfolio specifically, I work with the Asian brands. And within the Asia market, my biggest focus is on Indonesia. So as you may know, Indonesia is the second country in terms of contribution to marine litter. And we also have, it's a geographically challenging country also to work with because there's many different islands. As part of a country, it's a very big country. There's a big informal sector that is involved in the recycling and collection supply chain. So with the Indonesian brand, I work on collection projects. So what we do is we invest in waste collection projects. So this could be material recovery facilities. This could be more, let's say, digitally driven collection schemes where you can order a pickup for your waste through a digital mobile app. And then we also do work on PROs. So I think, as brought up by a few of the panelists, I think systemic change is really needed in this sector. One company cannot do it all. So we work together with other producers, brand owners to help bridge the gap in financing for the waste recovery sector. So Danone is part of IPRO, the Indonesia Packaging Recovery Organization. And it's part of the extended producer responsibility scheme, but at a voluntary level, because Indonesia does not yet have a mandatory EPR in that sense. They do have mentioned EPR and regulation, but it's not yet, let's say, mandatorily enforced, as what we see in many countries in, say, in Europe. And then on the other hand, I also, we know that there is a need to tackle waste at source. So turning the tap off on plastic is not just It's not just collection, it is not just offsetting, it's also really redesigning of products such that we're moving away from single use. And in a waste hierarchy, this should really be the priority. But at the same time, coming from the private sector, and it is something that the R&I team is working keenly on. I think we're trying to incorporate more recycled content into our packaging. But at the same time, we're also testing models that are more refill-based, reuse-based. But these changes cannot take place overnight. So it needs to be supplemented by other solutions. So there's really no silver bullet solution, as we need to tackle all levers. And that's why my focus is not just focusing on design changes, but also looking at what can we do to change the system as a whole, by working with communities, by working with startups, by working with industry organizations like our PRO to enact change at a larger level. And I truly believe that's where we can make a dent, even though it may be slower. But you can go further. If you go together, you can go further. So maybe I'll also touch a little bit on what I see as the main problems and the challenges that we see, especially in a developing country context. So traditionally, the waste sector is funded by governments, but there's not a lot of funding there. And that's why there's this huge leakage problem. There's not enough collection capacity on the ground. So even though, as Dipesh said, there might be very high, people really use the materials until, it's really at the end of its life. And if you go to, like, I'm calling in from Malaysia, if you go to the markets here, there's still a lot of, zero packaging options, the traditional markets. But at the same time, like, even though people know the problem, there's really not much infrastructure that exists. And if we only rely on public funding, it's going to be a huge, it's going to be a very persistent problem. So this is where we need more levers of financing. We need private sector to take responsibility, take ownership over the problem. And not only that, we need to develop end markets for scrap material. So a big step on extended producer responsibility is to really systematically channel funding from private sector based on the footprint that you make on the market. So how much you produce, your market share, you pay that much as part of the PRO. And then what does the PRO spend it on? They should really focus on spending it on the recovery, recycling and collection. So depending on countries, this would be different. So I guess in a lot of developing country context, the bottleneck is collection. We need more collection on the ground. And while for some materials, there's already a mature supply chain. For example, PET has pretty much quite a mature supply chain in Southeast Asia, at least. But for low value plastics, it's a huge problem, right? Because there's no end market. So if you have funding in, and if you do not complement it with demand for the end market, it's going to be extremely challenging to sustainably run these models. And I see a particularly huge issue for low value plastics. So some of the collection, you collect the low value plastics, and the best thing you can do is to send it to a sanitary landfill. or worse, you send it to a landfill, but a lot of landfills in this region are not sanitary. So we need to improve that. But what can we do more than that? So there are solutions for pyrolysis, but again, this is controversial because it's not very tightly regulated. It's still, so we need to do it right. And then there are some solutions that turn it into eco lumber. I think what Dipesh is doing also, turning it into a product, and I think we need to see more of it. But at the same time, the challenges of these solutions is that there needs to be scale. So for it to grow, you need a business model that can scale and be incorporated into a larger supply chain. And so for PET, I think we're seeing much more momentum in this area, because you see that producers are committing to using more recycled content. and they're organizing the market through PROs to source feedstock. So this would immediately put a very tangible impact onto the recycling rate of these materials, especially PET. So the next question we need to ask ourselves is how can we solve the economic issue for other types of low values? And if there's really no end market, there's no big scale end market for it, then regulation will need to contend with it, maybe through phased bans or by finding alternatives like biomaterials. But at the same time, it always comes back to how can we do it in a way that is that also allows for suitable alternatives that are economically feasible. Because biomaterials at the same time, there are also false solutions that we need to avoid. For example, if you have a biodegradable material, but at the same time it's only industrially compostable, but that in these countries we don't have industrial composters, so then it's just back to square one. So there needs to be, so the main message on my end is that there needs to be a coordination and collaboration across the supply chain. I think the best way to do it is through industry action, combined with very close engagement with the government. We've seen very good case examples in, for example, Vietnam. Their PRO is working very closely with the government to come up with an EPR. So this would then be a model that is communicated and familiarized with the industry, with industry input. And this is how you set up a system for success. So I'm excited to see momentum in this grow. But we still need to, there are still bottlenecks that we need to solve for example, low values, because the end markets are very difficult to scale at the current juncture.
Great, thank you, Z, for sharing those perspectives. And I think it's a great example of what global companies can do. I mean, particularly Danone, and also given the fact that the FMCG sector is a huge contributor to single-use plastics. My question was essentially, and I think it also sort of echoes the question that Henrique has posted, because we don't seem to see a sort of a consistent approach among companies when it comes to some of these strategies. So what can be done to ensure corporate consistency in your view? I mean, when in the move for moving away from single-use plastics across business units in various continents. And my question would also sort of adding to that would be, do you think global companies can actually take a uniform approach? I mean, especially given the fact, that we've heard from previous speakers and, the different regulatory systems, the conditions are completely different in developed countries and developing countries. So can we have, I mean, even if you're a global company, can you have the same sort of strategy in, say, Africa as you would do in Europe? Or does it really have to be sort of tailor-made to the requirements and conditions in each country and region?
To answer your last question, it definitely cannot be the same approach.
Right.
We're dealing with such different contexts, so it needs to be tailored to the local context for sure. I think the question on consistency and harmonization, I think that's a really great question, because I think at the current juncture there's a lack of transparency, even in terms of how much plastic each producer is putting onto the market. So if you don't start with data, then there is no ownership, and then there's no responsibility. So I think that efforts to create more transparency have begun. I think there needs to be more, and we do see examples where in specific countries that this has been done to a level that that we can actually see impact. So I mean, if you look at, for example, more mature EPR systems in Europe, where even you have like DRS, deposit return schemes for bottles. In that sense, you have a very unified approach. Anyone that is producing bottle packaging in the market has to enforce a certain standard onto the bottle, so that is received by the machines that is funded in the deposit return scheme. And in these countries, the recycling rate for bottles is upwards of 95%, 90%. So it's a much better outcome that we want to see. And the question is, how do we make this spread across the industry? And I think that's a challenge. I can touch on, for example, without seeing more tighter regulation, let's say on plastics and EPR, where you compel producers to share, data on their footprint and therefore pay their fair share of the cost of the problem. Then you have voluntary plastic credit schemes. And I know this is a very controversial area because people talk about greenwashing. And the reason why is because right now there's a lot of plastic credit schemes and there's no harmonization. There's no one single standard that we know is credible. And when I say credible, it means, you know that this plastic credit contributes to additional impact, meaning, it's not crowding out impact from another producer or another recovery project, but that it's contributing to additional impact in the system. And to that end, as well, Danone and like other producers, we are piloting certain standards to voluntary plastic credits, such as Vera through the 3RI initiative. And what we're trying to do there is to come up with a standard that imposes a strict criteria for additionality. So additionality is a very key criteria when it comes to making impact and plastic offsets. But the challenge is to get buy-in from the industry. So it is still at very early stages. And we do see some kind of harmonization efforts on that end. But I think the final thing to say on this is when you talk about harmonized approach, it cannot just rely on plastic credits. It cannot just rely on plastic offset. That should be at the bottom of the waste hierarchy. You need to start from your value chain. How do you reduce plastic in production in the first place? And to that end, that is really a difficult conversation because companies do not want to share this data, and if they're not compelled to, why would they? So this is why I come back to EPR, come back to extended producer responsibility. And when you have regulation like this and trialing it through a voluntary scheme, then we start seeing more openness and more transparency in the industry and more also engagement together with the government so that you're setting up the system for success.
Great. Thank you so much, C. And I think your point on the offsets also responds to one of the questions in the chat by Deether on whether there should be a plastic credit, very similar to carbon credit. I don't know, Deether, if that answers your question, but if not, feel free to let us know. So thank you again. And so with that, we come to sort of the general Q&A session. I have two specific questions addressed to Diana and one to Dipesh. So what I'd suggest is that let's take those two first, and then I'll have a general round of questions for everybody. So Diana, the first question to you is from Peter Smalley. He asked whether you could expand on the R&D and finance aspects of trade in plastics, specifically on how trade flows can help support circular R&D along the plastics value chain and how trade can encourage finance to flow into the circular economy. And then there's another question from Chris to you on how can trade agreements and policies be used to report on products being imported and exported, but also the percentage and composition of the packaging. Without this detailed information, it's difficult to get a clear and realistic picture of plastics in country. We see EPR failures without reporting on full picture with imported materials. So I don't know if you want to take those questions in order. I mean, I am happy to repeat them if you want.
Okay. So the question of how to, so I don't remember that you said the name of who asked the question. I didn't catch that, but this question of how trade can help get finance to move into transition or recycling. I think it goes both ways. So one is that, once even small amounts of trade are happening and people see that it's a potentially profitable exercise, then I do think that finance will flow there and entrepreneurs will start getting into it and doing it. And for example, I found in some of my interviews, people who are making seaweed-based water containers, you know, for concerts and for racing sports events and things like that. They can't trade them yet much because it's something to do with the technology that it doesn't, it's not very long lasting, you know, so it has to be for short-term use. So there's a kind of a chicken and egg question that, you know, what is needed to get the technology to be more robust so that the products can be traded in the first place. But I do think the fact that when a market exists, then entrepreneurs do start coming into it. And I think that's one of the things, for example, that my colleagues Enrique and David Vivas are showing very well with their work, that you know, the use of alternatives and substitutes is generating interest. But at the same time, you know, to scale this up and to think about doing this on a much bigger sort of platform. So we also then need to have the finance. And so in some elements, the finance needs to come first. And these particularly would be elements where maybe markets would not enter in the first place because it's risky or it's too long term or it's too much of a public good. You know, there's a lot of reasons why the markets won't succeed. And these are why we have development banks, for example, as one of their very important roles. And what is interesting to me in the research that I'm following with, you know, public finance and development banks and bonds is that it's just not going into those categories. So, for example, in the so-called certified green finance category, when you look at some other research I did with a colleague called Guy Finkel, and this is a UNCTAD research paper that you can find on our website, we looked at finance going into petrochemicals, and the money that goes into petrochemicals, about 95% of that money goes into plastic. Okay, so the other bit is fertilizer. But so the money that's going into petrochemicals and plastic, there's some development banks and central banks who have been funding that. It went up a little bit after COVID with the quantitative easing, when money was given out without looking at the conditions for which it was given. But for the most part, development banks have actually pulled out of petrochemicals and plastics, and they've pulled out in this, you know, you see it when you look at the trade trends, when you look at the finance trends after the Copenhagen and the Paris Accord. The public sector did actually respond to that by reducing its footprint and its exposure. But, you know, here's the thing is that maybe we need the public banks to still be there to help finance that kind of big leap, this huge leap of faith that needs to take place to transition into other products. Because these are things that the markets simply won't do that. They're too short-termist and they can't see the profit in it. It's not their role, that's the public finance role. So I think there's an interesting issue about what public finance should be doing here. And then the second thing is looking at the green finance. So when you look at the green finance going into petrochemicals, there was almost, I think we found, first of all, when you look at the Green Bond Initiative, they have categories for different sorts of activities. There's no category for plastic or for plastic-related industrialization. There's lots of categories for other things, but the category doesn't even exist. So I think that that's not sort of on their radar screen yet. And then the second thing is when you look at green bonds, which are not certified according to the Climate Bond Initiative, but they're still called green by the companies that issue them. And it's a huge amount of money, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars. But the amount that was going into petrochemicals was tiny. I think we found it was like less than 2%. So less than 2% out of the total is going into the industry that is producing plastic. So, you know, so here's the rub is that if we want to promote this kind of leap, you know, it's a leap to get out of, it's like a whole new industrial revolution all over, you know, and how are we going to finance that? That's the big challenge because the money's not going there yet. So I hope that answers the question. It's you know, mutually reinforcing cycle.
Thank you, Dana. Do you also want to respond to Chris's question on the composition of the packaging, you know, on the material composition and whether trade agreements and policies can help in greater transparency on knowing about what the packaging is consistent of?
Sure. Well, I'm sure that would be a fantastic thing, because first of all, it would give consumers, the ability to exercise their vote by choosing to follow some products and not others. And also industry would then, companies that are producing they would also be rewarded by their efforts of trying to make that. But, I understand it's, yeah, why not? We do it with food products, don't we? So why can we not also do it with packaging? There was a lot of resistance to putting labeling on food at the beginning. There was huge resistance, if I recall. And now it seems quite normal and standard to do it, although not all countries do it to the same levels, do they? So that would be, again, an area why we need to have this sort of global. I must say that I don't feel like I'm an expert on this question, so maybe other people can do better answers, but that would be my sense, yes. So, but it's something that will need to have global agreement at the level of, recording these HS codes, and also even before that, when producers are making the products. So there's just no way that any one country could do this by itself. When you think about the global value chains of the production, where a product starts in one country as a plastic nurdle, goes to another country as a primary product of manufacturing, and then ends up as an intermediate manufactured good, and then as a final good. So it could be over 5 or 6 different countries. So clearly we need to be coordinated in that.
Great. Thank you, Diana. So there's one question which is addressed to Dipesh, and that is on what is the scalability and replicability of traditional boat building through plastic waste? Dipesh, do you want to respond to that?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, thank you. As we investigated, we did an extensive sort of investigation on the number of heritage boat building schools and traditional boat building around the world. And whilst we're not talking about being mainstream Coca-Cola over here, there is definitely an opportunity for embedding the use of waste plastics as a raw material within boat building across the world. And it's not to say that it's all going to be made in Lamu, but this is a great open source concept that can be replicated, on the east coast of America down to Bangladesh, etc. Essentially, if you look at traditional boats, there's a lot of similarity in the way they're designed. There's a hull, there's lumber, which is the predominant part of it. And this has definitely got an opportunity for its use. There was a study also done I think it was in Switzerland, where they used ocean plastics to make small little sailing boats as well. So we're seeing this popping up a little bit more here and there. Our key is to continuously make this relevant to a low-tech environment as well, which is very important. It's going to work in our part of the world.
Great, thank you, Dipesh. So there are no more questions from the audience, but I just thought I'd give the floor for a final round of intervention to all the panelists, basically maybe focusing on just 2 aspects. One is where do you see sort of the knowledge gaps and the data gaps or research gaps that we need to be filled to have advance on policy making? And the second thing is where do you see policy intervention which would be most effective in the short run, which really is sort of what you would consider as the most effective intervention, either to scale up a business model or to address one of these plastic problem pollutions, and what would be the most feasible one? So I presume there's a difference in the answer to both. What is most effective as compared to what would be most politically feasible? So if you could conclude with just remarking on those. Firstly on the data research gaps, and secondly on what is really needed on the policy front. Thank you. We could start with you, Chris, if you want to go first.
Thank you. I think we can research things to death, and I'm always very concerned about that. I'm always very concerned about consultants putting reports together. I'd rather see actions on the ground. We need to see scaling of things like the flip-floppy project. We need to see scaling of applications. The opportunity is in terms of if we look at policy, is to drive that really around creating the value chains from the bottom up. Without that, we are unfortunately all stuffed. As I said, plastics production is going to increase by 40% over the next decade. The problem is going to get worse. If we don't create those value chains where policy and procurement allows a value chain to be created, we are going to be drowning in the stuff and having the same conversation in another 50 years' time. Well, you guys might be. I'm not going to be around in 50 years' time. But the opportunity is that we need to address realistic policy that has actions that are going to create markets and create value chains. Otherwise, it's policy for the sake of policy.
Thank you, Chris. Diana, and if I would also request all speakers to keep the response to a minute, if possible. Thank you. Diana, would you like to go next? I think we lost Diana. Garzicano, would you want to?
I'm sorry, I'm here. I had the door went.
Go ahead, Diana.
What was the question?
So it was just essentially on what you would see as, firstly, the data, the knowledge gaps, the research gaps going ahead, and secondly, what you would see as what is needed on the policy front in terms of most effective policy as also most politically feasible or realistic in the short term.
Oh my goodness.
I hope that doesn't.
Okay. First of all, I have to say I'm sorry for that. Someone came to the door. This is working from home. It has its challenges sometimes too. Oh look, this is an enormous question. If I had 20 research assistants working for 20 years, we could maybe answer some of these questions.
Or where do you see the low-hanging fruit, pretty much? Maybe that might maybe make it a bit easier.
Yes. I think the issue is, to my mind, the big challenge is that, every country has a slightly different configuration of the extent to which they're now embedded in plastics. So every country is a bit different, but at the same time, we're all a little bit the same. And I think that, by joining with research and by, for example, regional efforts at research and regional efforts at procurement and finance, all of those things would be incredibly helpful. Banning the plastic of some categories that are easily substitutable and are the biggest problems with waste. This is something that countries are doing, and we don't need to have double wrapped plastic bottles of shampoo and all these things that that just seems like the lowest possible hanging fruit that we could make, and we could also then generate employment for people making alternatives. But as I say, that to my mind, that's really quite a small part of the problem. So maybe one of the quickest things to do is to address the fossil fuel subsidy issue, because one of the reasons we're so embedded in plastic is that it's cheap. It's not only because it's fantastically useful, it's also really cheap. And as soon as we started to have paying more for it, maybe then we would consider better the way that we use things. And in terms of other lessons, I feel that we can learn a lot by thinking about the massive structural transformations that have taken place historically in other economies. Like, the East Asian industrial miracle of the last century happened because of a highly integrated response between a developmental state and finance and industry. And so, they transformed very rapidly. And other periods of time when that happened is like the 1930s with the original New Deal, Roosevelt and the United States. And the economist Schumpeter has this story about creative destruction and cycles. And so this is kind of the big conceptual thinking that we're trying to do in UNCTAD. And then at the same time, we try to dive in deep with really concrete things and, like this work on the plastic alternatives. But it all needs to come together. And I think that that's why what's really important is that we also have these regional and global efforts. So, for example, fossil fuel subsidies, to reduce that, probably all countries need to do it at the same time, because otherwise you end up having, shifting of cross different country borders. And But yeah, that would be a big one, and that would liberate hundreds of millions of dollars. And I know a lot of countries are trying to do this. But then at the same time, you know, you have to say, well, in some cases, these fossil fuel subsidies are used to compensate for low incomes of, you know, poor families. So you can't just stop the fossil fuel subsidy without having some other kind of income supporting mechanism. So
great.
I think I raised more. I think I raised more questions than I gave answers.
No, that is very, 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 very useful indeed, and a lot of food for thought there. Ganzi Kano, would you like to go next?
Thank you very much. Maybe I will share in the context of Zimbabwe, and I would say maybe what we need at the moment, maybe issues to do with having reliable and accurate inventories in terms of waste generation and characteristics data. And I think, in my view, that will basically aid in terms of planning and investment when it comes to maybe interested partners and stakeholders. I think we need that information at this particular point. Thank you.
Thank you. Deepesh?
Yeah, thanks. Diana, I'm glad you brought up the idea of the issue of subsidies. Without being too, well, I guess I'm going to be emotional about this and let the activist in me go, because it angers me. It angers me a lot that I'm an individual responsible citizen, and that's why, and like the rest of us on this call, we've taken this on to address a problem because we care. And that's what it boils down to. And we're hammering at it. We're going around taking money out of our own pockets, crowdfunding, thankfully having some supportive mechanisms like SMEP, etc., that undertake a lot of work to continuously deliver, but I'm grateful that they're there. But at the same time, you know, you can't ignore the fact that there are fuel subsidies and oil and gas subsidies and CEOs earning millions and millions of dollars in salary a year, while we're standing around essentially looking, you know, with our little begging bowls, trying to scrape through a couple of $100,000, if that, to essentially clean up the problem of that person to continuously have a $5 million a year salary plus bonus for his profits. And if we're going to start, and I know this applies to everything around the world, but it is the elephant in the room. And I think any person undertaking any problem with environmental issues still has to have that Greta Thunberg, and we need to have them out there. We need to be continuously hammering this out and holding people accountable, because it is tiring and it is weighing us down, and often we feel like we're losing over here. But we're optimistic that we can leapfrog the moment in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepesh. That is very powerful, and I think I hope that leaders and everybody here hear your message and do the right things at the right time. Z, would you like to wrap up?
Yeah, I feel you, Deepesh. We might be in, opposite sides of the aisle, but, I agree, we live in a very broken system. And we need to shed light on the imbalances, right? And I think in order to do that, we need better tools, and this is where knowledge comes in. So to answer your question, Mahesh, I think there needs to be better tools to help regulators, but also businesses to account better for the flows of plastics into the market. And I think, as Diana highlighted, production data is extremely hard to find. I worked for the World Bank before on plastics and circularity, and production data is very hard to find. We get more data on waste than on production itself. So we do need better tools, and I'm particularly interested in the transparency and traceability sector. I think there's a lot of exciting developments that's happening here. It gives tools to companies to trace better the chain of custody, of their products. You can also better, if these tools could be on the hands of regulators to put in a standard in a way that this information can surface and guide better policies. I think this could hopefully be a standard for the future and shine light on where we can correct these imbalances, because we don't have enough time. We have not enough time to fight the climate crisis, the plastic waste crisis. So we need to prioritize. Countries need to prioritize and businesses need to prioritize. And when we do our accounting, we are also relying on national assumptions that are sometimes are not updated. They're reliant on a small sample. And the fact is that there is not a lot of very granular data out there on like recycling rates per product and all that. So I know that there are very interesting efforts going on, but they need to be made public. They need to be turned into tools. They need to be updated regularly. So I see that research, it cannot just be a report. It cannot be a recommendation. I think it should lead to a product. It should lead to a tool that will enable dynamic application on it. So it cannot just be knowledge for the sake of knowledge, but knowledge for the sake of a solution. And your question on policy, I've spoken a lot on EPR, so I won't talk about that, but I think that policy without enforcement is nothing. We see beautiful blueprints, we see nice reports. We need better enforcement. At a surface level, we also see bans, but then on the ground we don't see anything. Especially in developing countries, because there's not enough enforcement. But I think from a product level, I think there's also a huge opportunity to harmonize standards when it comes to using secondary raw materials, because I think a lot of legacy regulations disallow certain industries from reusing certain types of materials, and this becomes a barrier to a circular economy. So I'll stop there.
Great, thank you so much, Z. And so we're a bit 5 minutes overdue, but I think that's fine. We've had a very rich session, and I'd like to thank all of our speakers for their diverse and excellent perspectives and contributions that they've shared with us today. I hope that as international policy making moves forward to address plastic pollution at the UNEA, in other fora, including on WTO, on trade-related aspects, that they are informed by and build upon these valuable lessons and experiences from Africa, Asia, and other developing countries that we've heard today. So I think that's it from my side. Enrique, over to you if you'd like to make any closing remarks. Thanks.
Mahesh, I would like to thank you for this moderation, and especially the panelists for engaging in this session. Again, this session both helps us to possibly contribute to literature. We're going to submit the background paper to a journal, and more importantly, perhaps to guide our procurement efforts under the SMAP project to put money where our words are. So as you said, Mahesh, many countries have different approaches and also have different problems. We could see by the breakout of data, import dependencies, types of plastics coming in and out of countries, that specific approaches are needed. I think that was corroborated by these words. And this level of harmonization will hopefully come in the next 2 years, as UNEA 5.2 working groups are working towards, like all the countries are working towards a binding treaty, a UN treaty on plastics. That's our biggest hope in this process. So that also reminds us to stop pouring money on the areas that are generating the problem, as Dipesh well reminded us. Finally, I would like to thank the sponsor of the session, FCDO, the UK, and remind everybody who wants to join us that we are most welcome to join on the second day of the seminar, which will have a session tomorrow at 9 a.m. at CT, European time, on manufacturing pollution, so common threads of manufacturing pollution and how to create demand for pollution mitigation solutions. And the second session will be focused on tanneries. Again, thanks everybody for joining. We appreciate your engagement, and let's keep the ball rolling. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, bye.